Where's my picture? Okay, I can now stand and I have a blank screen. So. We are going to get success. Okay, while I was getting ready, what I thought we'd do is we start off with just an overview of what has happened with business interruption, or what's happened with the COVID and its impact on insurance, which is mainly business interruption. So we'll just look at an overview, and then we'll have a INSETA here. We'll discuss the. Okay, while I was getting ready, what I thought we start off with just an overview of what has happened with the business interruption. This is so exciting. Sounds like an echo.
Sorry, that was the stream. It's the YouTube stream, and we'll turn that off. Thanks.
Okay, so where's my slides?
They are on the way. Lebogang is just busy opening them for you. Thanks.
This is so exciting. Sounds like an echo.
Sorry, that was the stream. That's the YouTube stream, and we'll turn it off. Thanks.
Okay, so where's my slides? Donald, I think by the time you come here, it'll be sorted out. So that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, can we get a full screen, or do you want to leave it like that? I think full screen would be better if we can. Okay, as you can see from the title, what this first section is going to just look at is the response to BI claims in the UK, South Africa, and the US. So the responses have been different to any other previous incidents that we've had. So we thought let's just start off with having a look at that. Okay. I think that COVID is unprecedented, and I think the response is unprecedented. Clearly, with a lockdown, every single business in the world would suffer a business interruption loss. If you could have a policy that would respond to that, that policy would respond to every single business that has suffered a loss. And quite clearly, even if you wanted to hold the insurance industry liable for that, there isn't sufficient money in order to pay those claims anyhow. So that would be an act of futility. It's unusual that we've had this response because we've had other pandemics, the most famous of which is called the Spanish flu. It's actually not the Spanish flu because the flu broke out in America, so I'm not quite sure why they call it the Spanish flu, but it started in America. Now that flu, if you have a look from an insurance perspective, if you read the history of insurance, you see it had some impact. Basically 1 or 2 lines in the history of insurance companies. In a way, it's known as the forgotten pandemic, although it was such a traumatic affair. The world seemed to move on quite quickly. So there was there was an escalation in life claims for the Old Mutual, and in that year there was a net outflow in the life funds as they paid for the claims which incurred. But that was not the end of the world. Okay, that looks like the end of my slides. I think I'll have to get my phone here and use my phone and talk to my phone. I think my phone is actually more reliable, so let me just get my phone here.
Okay, it's back, Prof.
Plan B. Okay. Okay, so the world has never had a situation where insurance companies had to deal with a situation where all their policies have been triggered. Fortunately, in this case, as I'm sure Donald will point out, the part of the policy which was involved was an extension, not the main policy. So if it was the main policy, I think there wouldn't be a problem because everybody would have realized that that can't be paid. So there wouldn't have been no court cases or anything like that. What insurance companies have to deal with quite often is a problem of accumulation. So not the entire world, but we can have a large number of claims from one event, 9/11, where 2 massive multi-billion rand buildings came down. thousands of people were killed. If you added up the total cost of those claims, I think they were $70 billion. So we have had that, and the market knows how to deal with accumulation. Can't deal with a situation where the policy gets there. We have the fires, St. Francis Bay, we had fires, destroyed a large number of very expensive homes. So the market has ways of dealing with accumulation. Would not be able to deal with a single event triggering all policies as such. Okay, so COVID is different. First time in the history of the world, all BI policies could be triggered at the same time. There are other policies that might also be triggered, but we'll concern ourselves with the BI policies over there. No doubt these costs would never have been paid by the insurance industry. So if that happened, I'm sure the matter would not have even gone to court. I think that the market has learned from this and will learn from it, and I think what they've already learned is going forward, policies need to be clearer, cleaner, simpler, and administratively tightened. So in the past, I think Dawn is our legal advisor and also placed the university's insurance, and she tells me for 20 years that she was there, she tried to get copies of the policy. She never got copies of the policy. So the policies don't feature very highly in the world until there's a claim under those particular circumstances. So the industry is going to have to pay a lot more attention to the actual policies as such. I also have a problem which we won't discuss today, is that many of the interpretations that I have read, many of the interpretations that I heard, I don't think they are correct. So I describe them as problematic. But that's where we can do research going forward, as we can see, to discuss those going forward. But I think much more interesting and much more unique is we found a new way of dealing with claims. There was an old method, well tried and applied, worked for centuries. We have a new method of dealing with these claims, completely different. Now, what is the old method? Individual cases were taken to court, and the outcome of that was observed by others, so it's what's known as a test case. And so everybody knew that this case was going, they waited for their case, and when that decision came out, they made a decision and went from there. So the example of this was the AA Mutual in the 1980s. And the question of that arose over there when the brokers received the premiums. AA Mutual had been wound up or was put into liquidation, what business was. So the question, who owned those premiums? Did the broker pay it to the insurer? Did the broker pay it back to the client? So they did the standard way, got together, had an application to the High Court. The presiding judge was the well-known Mr. Justice Richard Goldstone, also the Vice Chancellor after that at the University of the Witwatersrand. Okay, he then came to the conclusion, based on a common law, the premiums belonged to the insurer, which was fine, we could have settled the matter. But of course, being in the common law depends on the facts, a different set of circumstances may give a different ruling. So the industry still was not satisfied by that. They took it to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court approached it differently, those days known as the Appellate Division, and then relied on a section in the Act, Section 20 bis, which no longer exists, and interpreted and said, okay, it's clear now, all the premiums belong to the insurer. So that settled it. So that was the old way of doing it. Get a test case, and everybody else looks at it and makes a decision. The new method is which we've just seen over here, and that would not have happened until recently, and it only exists because of the rise of what one could call the regulator. The regulating system as we know it is very new, maybe 2008 onwards. I think it evolved. I don't think it was designed, it evolved as we got. And in the UK, the regulator decided it would bring the case to the courts on behalf of consumers, and then the court would give a decision which will be of guidance for people to settle the claims. It's quite an important point because it's not a decision where it's decided in favor of somebody else, but it told everybody this is how it would interpret, and you decide how you want to settle the claims based on the interpretation which we've got. Now that was in terms of specific legislatives which exists, which is the Financial Market Test Case Scheme, and in terms in the Practice Direction 51M. I make that point because it wasn't just a regulator deciding to go to court. There was a legislative system to allow that to happen. We could have discussions about that as well. There's considerable uncertainty which had arisen, as you'll see in the next slide, which impacted on a large number of consumers, and so the regulator thought we need to get clarity on the point and took the matter to court. Okay, court case started in June the 9th, 2020. 21 different policies involved, issued by 7 different insurance companies, and there were 2 other people who intervened in the judgment. So before the court, with 21 policies and 7 different insurers. That doesn't happen. You know, normally you have, as in the AA Mutual case, the court is faced with a very clear policy, insurer answer. So yeah, it was like, take all of these policies, lump them together and tell us how it should be interpreted, and we will tell you how we interpret it, and when you give us a decision, we'll go back to the office and decide how to go forward from that point. So it's a completely different approach. It is estimated that actually they only looked at 21 policies, but there were over 700 different types of policy involved, issued by 60 different insurance companies involving 370,000 persons. I think you can see this is more like a class action type of thing than a specific legal case which we've got. It involved 35 barristers, 15 of which were QCs. 10 of the barristers were women, and they were instructed by 7 different legal firms. Of the 15 QCs, 1 woman was a woman QC in that one. And the judgment is 162 pages long, and my slides disappear. I'm going to go back to my plan B. Okay, so the judgment is very complex, and I say it's not really a judgment that you can read in a normal sense to say, here's the legal issues. It's more, this is how we can interpret the different provisions, and this is how the court would interpret. The insurers would interpret differently. But of course, if the court has interpreted a certain way, then of course that favors the way you would settle the matter which you've got. Neither the Financial Conduct Authority nor the insurance companies were totally happy, so they decided they would take it to the Supreme Court. Normally the Supreme Court has to go, the case goes from the High Court to the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court. They decided to leapfrog over the Court of Appeal and go straight to the Supreme Court. And when the High Court judgment was laid, was an argument as to who won. Did the consumers win or did the insurance companies win? And it was like, okay, I think when it went to the Supreme Court, it was now quite clear who was going to win. And in this case, it was the policyholders which were going to do so. It allowed most of the regulators' appeals against the High Court decision, finding largely follow the policyholders influence the outcome. Specifically in the diseases clause, which is important to South Africa because it's that extension which has been subject to the litigation. The part that I find a little bit disturbing is the overturning of the Orient Express case. That I'm busy writing a separate article because that case involved the mainstream policy, not an extension. So that would have massive implications going down the road unless insurers now amend their policy to make it almost clear. Okay, again, since the case provided guidance, insurers had to consider claims against the guidance provided, and the cases went in favour of the policyholders, and insurers then started to settle the claims which they had. Okay, what happened in South Africa? South Africa, we started almost identically to the same way which started in the UK, with the regulator getting involved and the regulating deciding that maybe he should go to court and get a decision. And I think the regulator then canvassed the opinion of the insurers to say this is the way that we should go. And I think the consensus in the industry was it's unnecessary to duplicate it. If the UK Supreme Court comes to a decision, that would be very good guidance for South Africa, so we don't need to do it twice. And so that then fell off. Okay. But what did happen is a number of individual cases went to the court, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, and the most famous of which is Cafe Chameleon versus Guard Risk, and all of these were basically came out, all except the last one, were really in favour of the policyholder. And I think the view was even then, okay, we got these decisions, but let's just wait and see what happens in London, then we will think it again. The last one is much more interesting, which involved the Lombard Insurance Company. The rational approach, I think, to this whole lot should have been, let's wait for London, our law is very similar. The policies are London policies, so that will be the guidance. But not everybody wanted to do that. And the one which is not well known was the Lombard Insurance Company, because the approach was made to the court to say to the court, let us put this thing on hold until after, I think normally in this case, until after the South African Supreme Court of Appeal has made its decision. The insured then insisted, no, they wanted this to be heard. And so the judge had to decide whether to order that it be taken off the roll or to continue. And the judge ruled in the Lombard Insurance Company's favour that the matter be taken off the roll and come back after the matter's all settled, and it's now been settled. Okay, so the outcome which is important to us is the UK's favour the policyholders, South Africa's follows the policyholders, insurers guided by the decisions in settling their case. Cost is difficult to estimate the case. It's certainly several billions of rands, with the reinsurers being responsible for the most. I think my original estimate would have been about 32 billion rand, it would have been the cost. I think it's probably closer now to 20. The thing that has always troubled me is that we're pushing it onto the reinsurers, and everybody around the world is pushing it onto the reinsurers. I'm not sure what the position is with the reinsurers. It's fine that we say, well, okay, they pay for it. Maybe when the whole world pushes all their claims onto the reinsurers, they can't afford to pay that way. Anyhow, from an academic perspective, and hopefully all of academics' interest in research opens a way for a great deal of research to be done on all of the aspects of the cases. So I think it's a bit early to do any of that research at this stage. We need to see what other opinions come out, let the dust settle, and then we make a decision. Okay. Now, what happened in the US? The US is insurance is a state and not a federal matter, and therefore it's dealt with in 50 different states. So it's like trying to keep track of 50 different countries. It's rather difficult to do. Regulation is also a state and not a federal matter. And in South Africa and the UK, it's really been a matter which the courts would decide. So nobody else has really been involved. The regulator was involved, but the regulator was just being involved as a facilitator of court decisions. So the regulator did not try to make a decision as a regulator and say, I'm ordering you to settle the claim. Although I must say that many of the statements our regulator made was heading in that direction. And I think it can't go in that direction, but it never really got there. Okay, in the US, almost immediately, members of the United States Congress, federal government, wrote to the insurance community and said to them, please settle these claims. We don't care what your policy says. We think it's in the public interest to settle these claims, particularly for small businesses. And that. I think there must have been discussion between the members of Congress and the industries, because they all replied jointly the same day. So as they got the thing, so I think they were waiting for this, and they all knew about it. And they said, we can't do that. We have a policy. The policy is approved through the regulatory system. We have to stick by the policy that we've got. So that was the end of that attempt at the federal government. US regulation is very complex, 50 states. And so they've produced thousands of different documents, but these have all been captured by a legal firm, which is on the internet. So if you want to know what happens, there's a spreadsheet out there which I can refer to you, and you can get any state and you can push any button and find out what those are. But they have not done what, so if you want to know what happens, there's a spreadsheet out there we can refer to you, and you can get any state and you can push any button and find out what those are. But they have not done but they were not able to do that. So for about 6 months, there was a discussion between the different legal courts as to how they can consolidate it. And then they said, no, we'll have to do it on a one-by-one basis, old-fashioned way, take a decision, set a precedent, and make a decision from there. So today, over 1,200 cases have been filed, and unlike the South African cases, most of these cases involve the main policy, so it's much more disturbing. If you hold the main policies liable, then we triggered every policy in the world. That would be a main problem. Insured, and I watched the first one, being the COVID world, you could actually do it online, and I actually watched the very first case where they tried to convince the judge that this is a valid business interruption claim. Now, in order to convince the judge, you'd have to show that your property suffered physical damage. Now, COVID didn't create physical damage, and so everybody's trying to convince the judge for one reason or another that there's physical damages, and there isn't physical damage. So it didn't work. So what happens in almost all of these cases, as we'll see, is an application, and then in South African terminology, the insurers take an exception. So there is no basis in law, just dismiss it out of hand. So there are no trial cases, just at the preliminary situation where we've got. Now there's the daily or weekly filings on COVID. You can see it peaked, and now it's settling down, going down to zero, but that's a bit misleading, because the cases which are now coming are multi-billion rand cases. The cases at the lower end, they were small cases, but these are now multi-billion rand cases. Big groups now coming to try and litigate. So that's a cumulative total. These are all being collected by the University of Pennsylvania. So if you go to their law faculty, there's an interactive website which you can have a look at it too, and you can see what's happened. Okay, there's a remarkable difference which cannot be explained at this point in time between decisions made by federal courts and decisions made by the state courts. The green are the cases which have been dismissed against the insured. You know, there's no cause of action. Go away. Don't come back. And that's with prejudice. Don't ever come back. There's no basis of going. So from that, you can see virtually no insured has managed to succeed to convince a federal court at this point of time. Most of them have been dismissed at the exception stage. Now, those which are not at the exception stage means they can now go to trial. So we can get decisions coming out of these going into the future. We're not sure what they'll be. At this point, so in South Africa and the UK, we've basically settled what our dispute is. In the US, none of them are settled yet. Okay, now there's the difference. That is at the state level. You can see the green is much smaller, and the blue is dismissed but not with prejudice. So those they could reformulate and come back. Vastly difference between those two. So we can summarize. Okay, in terms of the mathematical theory of insurance, insurance cannot work where all policies pay out. So to say I have a policy that everybody in the world can get paid out, that's like saying, if you look at the lotto today, it's 100 million, and everybody who bought a ticket, they're all going to get the 100 million. That's fine, but the money's not there. So that's not what happened. And I think intuitively in insurers, we're going to look at this in the third presentation a bit there. Intuitively, I think insurers understood this. So even before they look at their policy wordings, they would say, this is not what we can pay out, because that's not how it works. So initially, insurers repudiate all the BA extension-based claims. These claims did not involve the main policy. The courts in the US have ruled in favor of the insurers, and much research remains to be done analyzing the UK and SA judgments in greater detail. So for those who love research and are interested in research and want to have more discussions of this, going forward, this is a very fertile area. The US courts at a federal level have been ruling in favor of insurers, but these cases are mainly on the main policy. So we do not know at this stage where the US is going to end up. South Africa, we've got a very good idea. UK, we have a good idea. We know the direction the US is going, but we don't know where they are yet. So that's an overview of what has happened on the COVID situation. Thank you. Lebo is our master of ceremonies.
Yes.
I personally appointed her, so that's a good job for you.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you, everybody, and welcome once again. I just need to let everybody know of certain things to do with the technology here today, as we're all getting used to it. So for our colleagues who are participating virtually, please note that you can send your questions via email, only via email, to Mike Stewart, and I'm not sure if his email address is projecting now, but we'll project it now. It's mike.stewart@vets.ac.za. And for our participants who are here physically, who brave the traffic and the bathing and the everything to come here, you will be able to participate from where you are sitting. And basically how it will work is that if you've got a question, the mic in front of you, when you press it, it will go red, so you'll be aware that somebody, else is talking or asking a question, and then, I don't know, there's a camera that will come to the mic that is talking and that is projecting, and so Prof and the other speakers can take those questions directly in that way. So there we go. We've got for the virtual attendees today, mike.stewart@vets.ac.za, and just to make it easy for Mike to navigate that, you can put on the subject line BII for Business Interruption Insurance, and you can pose your question or you can pose your comment over there. And then okay, and then I just wanted to let everybody know where the bathrooms are. They are on this floor on the right for the ladies, right on this floor, and then for the gents, it's basically downstairs of that, in between the staircases. At this moment, Adeline, is Ms. Gugu here as well? Okay, at this stage, we're going to give the floor to INSETA to take us through the research initiative. So it's over to you and the floor is yours. You are but ever.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Adeline Singh. I am the Head of Research and the Skills Planning Manager at INSETA. And thank you to one and all for attending this session today on business, and also wanting to find out more about INSETA's research initiatives. I'm going to give you a short introduction to our CEO who's here today, Gugu Mkhize. And Ms. Mkhize has been the CEO of INSETA since the 1st of December 2020. And she's no stranger to the SETA environment or the public sector. She's previously held roles of Executive Manager, Corporate Services at the MQA, which is the Mining Qualifications Authority, and Senior Corporate Manager at the KZN Growth Fund, as well as Corporate Service Senior Manager at the Johannesburg Social Housing Company. Gugu holds a master's degree, so an MBA from Regent Business School, and also has a BA in Honours from UKZN, as well as her BA degree from UKZN. So Gugu also has various other qualifications, and we at INSETA are extremely proud to have a leader with the background and knowledge and skill sets as Gugu has. So when Gugu joined us in December, she literally hit the ground running with her wealth of experience and exposure, and basically taking up the management and executive team, sharing the vision and mission for us and keeping us on track. Quite a smooth transition, taking over from our former CEO, and at the forefront, holding research close to her heart to drive the agenda in the sector. So since joining INSETA, Gugu's first 100 days of office, she engaged with multiple stakeholders, and she wanted to better understand the sector, and she had then shared her vision to all of our stakeholders around research and innovation, around digitalization and its impact on delivering on e-learning. Very importantly for us here today as well, enhancing the body of knowledge. And we all know that Prof. Vivian and Dr. Albert have been working day and night to make sure that those books are now released to the sector. And we are quite glad that these books are now available about the impact that it's been having. Either we've heard of it, we've read it in the papers, seen it on social media, or experienced it in our own way of some form or the other. And this is CEO also then started looking at integration of skills development ecosystem to enrich the partnerships with the higher education institutions as well as our TVET colleges. I look forward to welcoming you now, Gugu, and please a warm welcome to Gugu Mkhize, our CEO of INSETA.
Thank you, Adeline. Good morning. For one second, I thought, who are you introducing? Because I couldn't understand who you're introducing. But thank you very much for that lovely introduction. As introduced, my name is Gugu Mkhize, and mine is just to reaffirm or seal the relationship which has gone on for more than just over a year between VETS and INSETA, and just to express also our appreciation for this partnership, Professor Vivian and Dr. Albert, for the relationship that we have had and the role that you've played in championing the research that we had given to VETS to help us with in enriching the sector. So in terms of the framework for our research, I'm sure you would know, ladies and gentlemen, that it is anchored on four pillars in terms of innovation, research excellence, and also creating a knowledge hub, which is our research library, and also supporting the postgraduate studies for those who intend to study in the insurance field. And this sort of serves as an anchor for all types of research that we have had to undertake as an organization. And you would know that you are one of the three research chairs that we've had. And the focus of this one was, of VET, was obviously ensuring that we produce those books, part 1 and part 2 of the body of knowledge, but also ensuring that you support us with the undertaking the research on SMEs and cooperatives. And it's such a relevant discussion at this moment because our sector, 92% of our sector, is consisting of SMEs and co-ops. So it is a very fitting research that you've undertaken, and we're definitely going to take it forward and ensure that it makes its way not only in our programs, but we also share it with the sector just to ensure that we enrich the sector in as they do their planning, and also to enrich the SMEs themselves. But also the research that was undertaken, I am told, and you would forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, because I am 4 months into the position. So the research also that I was told was undertaken, which I've had sight of, is also around the tracer studies, because one of the critical aspects of our work is that as we invest so much money on training programs, multiple training programs, is to see the impact, and we are only able to see that impact by tracing where our money has gone to in terms of return on investment. So your role in ensuring that we have that tracer study, and also we have a framework for other tracer studies that we might want to embark on going forward, has been very important for us. And then also the last one was around the top 10 occupations in the sector. I'm sure you would be aware that before COVID, there used to be a world skills program that countries would participate in, which would be sort of like a showcase of current and future skills. And I'm hoping that through the top 10 skills that have been identified, we can be able to project what current skills demands are, but also look into the future in terms of what the skills a profile of our sector would look like, and also help with ensuring that our sector remains agile and it's able to adapt even beyond the COVID and also the 4IR impact in terms of digitization. So this relationship has really borne fruit, a lot of partnerships, which I think will go beyond just the contract which we've done in the last a couple of years. But I think it goes beyond that because the relationship between INSETA and vets will continue to be harnessed even beyond just the contractual relationships. And Prof would like to express our sincere thanks to you and your team for also leading and championing the research agenda or aspects of the research agenda in the insurance sector. And we look forward to ensuring that we now put into practicality the research outputs that have come out through this relationship. So I think I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, CEO. If anybody has questions with regards to the INSETA presentation or anything to do with that, you are welcome to, or even for Prof's earlier presentation. However, I know that Prof Vivian as well is going to present something, an aspect of the research chair that VETS has been involved in. But Adeline, you will say something first, and then after that we'll have Prof, and then people can prepare their questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm basically just going to sum up in terms of our research. We are, as I said, quite pleased to have a CEO that supports the research agenda. And we are looking forward to future partnerships with the higher education fraternity so that we can grow the pool of skills in the country. In order to do this, we as INSETA require partnerships, strong partnerships, not only with our higher education institutions, but also with business. And today here in the audience, we have invited various business partners to sit in and listen in on the challenges that we are currently facing as a country, the economic turmoil that we are going through, and what can we as a partner do together with you as higher education and business to make sure that we start from now to bridge the gap. We currently have other research partners as well working together to deal with some of the challenges. And if there is, from the seminar that ends today, if there are any challenges that we are currently facing that you truly believe we need to add to our research agenda, I would ask that each and every one of you make a proposal to INSETA to say that here is the issue around the impact of reinsurers. And if our reinsurers are being impacted by business interruption, then should we start the research? And I hear Prof Vivian saying that maybe we need some time before we actually start doing this. I would say we could scan the environment right now as a research institution. You've got to look back and then measure yourself as you move forward. So looking at the changes that are going to come about over the next few months to the next few years, I've heard from some insurers that the vaccine will probably take about 5 to 8 years to roll out, given the rate at which it's going at the moment, which means, are we going to be facing further business interruption? If so, what will the change be for the skill sets in the country? Because INSETA is currently working on projects on the digital economy, the gig economy, on digitalization, very importantly on job shift. And what we've noticed is that there's a huge shift in jobs, where the skill sets that you knew of last year will no longer exist this year. They are changing by the day, they are changing by the week. And we have partnered with business to make sure that we as a CETA are on top of these things and that we are fully aware and alert to the changes that are happening so that we can be responsive as well with our partners of higher education and the TVET colleges. Because for some of these changes that are happening in the sector right now, there is no curriculum that exists. There's nothing that exists. We have surveys that are currently being run, and we've partnered with the ILO. Professor Hussein Rasool, who's here in the audience as well, is doing a lot of work around that space. INSETA wants to partner. We are willing to partner with business, industry, and government institutions so that we can make sure our research moves forward together. If we work on research in isolation, we are going to probably be doing something quite similar to someone else, whereas we need to pull our resources together. We can do more in that way. So I ask that you give us your suggestions on adding to the research agenda, and thank you so much for having us here today. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Adeline. I don't know if there's any questions for the CEO or for Adeline at the moment. If not, Prof. Vivian, we are ready for your aspect of this.
Are we going to get a slide
I'm
up?
getting your slides.
Okay, as you know, wait to the slide, and as you know, this is a research university, so our main interest is research, teaching and research. So, to be associated with INSETA on research is quite exciting, and we think quite profitable. We think, profitable academically, that we think we can get quite a lot of synergy between that. So it's what we do, what INSETA wants to do, and whether we can merge to come out at a common goal, which I think we can. And I think today, I think you should regard as really beginning of that possibility. So I would point out that we are here all today, not because of, we thought that was a good idea, but because it's INSETA's initiative. So that it's really, we got involved with research with them, and now it's a matter of let us look at what they want to do and go forward with them. So we are only here because of INSETA, which I think is quite important, because this wouldn't have happened. So this aspect of research would not have been discussed. I have had a good look at INSETA's research agenda, their strategy, and I think it's basically very sound. And I think that could work quite well within that framework. And much of what I'm going to say comes from that framework. When you look at what we do at WITS, you can say there's one focus. You can say that INSETA may have a different focus. So can we get a commonality between those focuses, or can we just say these are three areas? And in each of those areas, we can contribute. So, for example, every year, like last year, honors students. So each honors student, INSETA does, and what we do. I thought they are all the same. It's just a more focus in certain aspects than other aspects. And that's not anything wrong with that. Continue that way. And I would say that if I look at the research that CETA has in mind and carries out, I would put it into what I would put three different categories. And looking at the research agenda, I could take their objectives and put them into these different categories. I think we would put more emphasis, and when I say we, I would say the insurance division at WITS. Other divisions like economics and that would make contributions in other sections, so it's not that alone. So one was I would call is human resource management. So obviously that's a big interest and a big thing that INSETA needs to focus on. Does the industry have the skills it requires? If not, how can INSETA assist to get that? Do they understand the picture? Can we get a picture out of that? So that's what I would call human resource management. Skills supply, skills demand, managing those two. In academics, we would look at that as labor economics, as all supply and demand. It's not necessarily what we would do in insurance, which is on the technical side. And the other one, which I think is quite important, and is what I would call skills empowering. So 40,000 people working in the industry, are they given the facility to get the skills that they need. Those are largely technical skills. So when the public phones up, and I can give you a rather amusing case to illustrate that, to show you it doesn't really work that well. So a process to make sure that industry can empower persons working in the industry to know what they're doing. Let me give you this rather amusing one. I must smile because the people who this referred to are here today, so I should maybe not do that. Have an insurance claim, and so put in an insurance claim against the insurer. So you would think the insurer now does this all day, every day, they would get it right. The insurer repudiates the claim. When I look at it, I said, do you realize what the insurer has done? They've taken a definition in the policy and they repudiated it on the definition, not on a term in the policy. And if you look at the term that they should use, that term doesn't appear in there. You can't repudiate a claim on a definition. So the lawyers will understand what I mean. But that's what they did. So I said, how is it that somebody who spends their whole life on this policy obviously never even read the policy? In addition to that, there are statutory rules, which is the policyholder protection rules, that didn't comply with those either. So it seemed to me, on the technical side, the technical empowerment is not there. And the last one is what we're really doing today, and is when things change, is can we harness and capture that knowledge? Can we put that knowledge into the right framework? Can we add to the contribution of that knowledge? So those are the three areas. And when we have a look at what we've done in the last year, you'll see we've looked at those three areas. Hey, what happened to my things that changes the picture? It was doing it all by itself, so it was quite magic. Okay, if you have a look at INSETA's research agenda, which, as I say, I was quite impressed with and happy with. Very few changes. I would have just changed the word agenda to framework. So there's a framework which to do it, and out of that framework we decide what to do, and that becomes the agenda. So the agenda changes from year to year, but the framework need not. So if you have a look at it, a virtual repository for the industry and students. Now, we don't have that yet, but if we had that during the lockdown, then we would have been able to sort of go from offline, online painlessly. It was not, couldn't do that. So, for example, and I must tell you that the university has got fantastic people that work for it. I had to say, look, I have postgraduate students I'm supervising, but I need some out the library. The libraries are all closed. The librarians came and protested the stuff for me, so very good. Research studies in student skills planning and technology. So that's a supply and demand part which I would take. Now the highlighted one is what I think we're doing today, is research events for the benefit of the industry. So there's an event which has happened, and we want to have a look at academically, what does this event mean, what can we learn, and how do we modify the body of knowledge from that. And from that we can translate that into what we teach, and from that into the notes, textbooks, and things there. What we have not done, and my plan later on, you see, is to continue to do that as a networking for academia and industry. Much of the research, I think, is done really at universities. There's no reason why a lot of this research should not be done in the industry and also with the professions like lawyers. Lawyers do this stuff all day, you know, so we need to provide a forum where we can get that research together. That's the last part on the agenda, page 8, in networking for academics and the industry. So I think your research agenda, I think it's very solid. I just gave you my comments on it, to just change the agenda to framework, and then just implement what you thought was a good idea, because it's an excellent idea. So I think we could go quite well along that one. Okay, let's have a look at what's happened at this point of time. Those are the CEOs already pointed out the different partnerships with 3 universities, WITS, UCT, Durban University of Technology. What it turned out that WITS would do is develop a body of knowledge which can be used for training purposes. That's empowering people technically to avoid the problem which we have. We need to identify, which is now on the labour economic side, skills needs for emerging sector and cooperatives and financial institutions. And what the CEO has already pointed out, the impact studies. The impact study is just about complete. We haven't got the final report yet, but it's a fantastic piece of research. That is to see how has INSETA's programs impacted on society. The only way to do that is to find people who've gone through that and ask them. And the research team have interviewed over 3,000 respondents. And if you know anything about sampling, you know that's a fantastic achievement. So you're doing quite well on all of those. So on the first part, what I call skills empowering, having a system to make sure that people are technically competent in what they do. That's why I would put the Body of Knowledge project, which we have started on. Now, what is a body of knowledge? It's very simple. If you want to be a professional in any field, if you're a doctor, actually a lawyer, accountant, doesn't matter which profession it is, there's four fundamental things that you have to do. One, you have to be certified that you've mastered a defined body of knowledge. So if you're a medical doctor, you were taught medical science. If you went to a university and you were taught engineering science, you wouldn't be a doctor. You have to learn the body. Now, what we argued, Albert and I, for a very long time ago, is that there is no defined body of knowledge out there. It exists in fragmented portions. And what we thought we should have a consolidated body of knowledge. In our view, we take 8 books, and we take anybody who wants to regard themselves as a profession in the insurance industry, 2 years to do those 8 books. So that's the plan that we have. We've done 2 of those. And it doesn't exist. And that's the contribution, is to make sure that we can get it to work. They have to have practical knowledge, they have to be fit and proper, and then they have to be a member of the professional body. So they have to be recognized in the industry, in this case by the Insurance Institute of South Africa, and say, we recognize that you're qualified for that. So what we want doing in the first part is, Michael's going to go and fetch it. These are the 2 volumes. So when we finished 8, my colleague there, he was a bit upset. He's nodding now, but when I said you have to read 8 books, he said, you don't think anybody's going to read 8 books? He says, surely they are reference books. I said, no, they read them and we give them exams and they have to pass the exams, because if you want to be a professional, you have to have something and certified. The system's not complete yet. We need to finish the system. We've got 2 books, but we also need to put the other 3-4 points into. So hopefully going forward, we will get it done. So we will have a very well-recognized professional. But Albert and I can tell you quite a lot of work. These notes are used at BITS at the moment. Part of them are also used at UNISA. So it will also give us articulation from industry to the universities and so on. Okay, I won't spend too much more time on that one. So the starting point is to have a defined body of knowledge, which is a public good. Now that's quite important, because in our view, it's no use having a body of knowledge and it's hidden away, other people can't have it, and there's whole copyright problems. And say, no, it's available. Just take it, use it, train. We just have to find a way of examining people now to get that. And Kobus over here, he was on part of the team, he's checked it. We had a team of about 30 people in the industry to go through the book. And then a much smaller team, Kobus was one of that team of experts who would look at specific parts of the notes to see that they're happy and they reflect the industry. So we also think that we should have a system that once this is up and going, that it's collaborative with the industry. So if you can see the system we have in mind, the university, INSETA, the industry, all working together to achieve something. So it's not an isolated but an operational system which we've got. Okay, we have already carried out, that was not done by myself, done by another unit called the REAL unit, specialized in doing this, have done a fantastic job again. So went to look at small and emerging enterprises and the cooperative financial institutions. Now I bet you nobody knows what a cooperative financial institution is. I do certainly now know, because I had to look it up, do research, and then see whether we have any of those in the insurance industry. We found that there were 1 or 2 which we would do. So here's simply part of the results which we have got from that work, which has already been done, which is a very interesting thing. I think anybody who's in the industry will not be surprised with the outcomes. So you ask the question, what are the main challenges that your business or cooperative currently faces? Now, this is then a questionnaire sent to all the SMEs and the cooperative, and then we get their views. Not surprising, what do you think? The very last one over there, the over-regulation burden. I think anybody in the industry will tell you that since phase came out, the regulatory burden has increased significantly and they have great difficulties in dealing with it. And SME has the greatest difficulty dealing with it. If you're a major corporation, you can put compliance officers in and you can do all of those things. But if you have a small business of 5 or 6 people, it's almost impossible to comply with it. Now, we know this, and I think going forward is where we need now to say, let's do some research to see how we can then alleviate this burden. It's not that the industry and the regulators are unaware of it. They just haven't solved it. So now we can say, let's go forward and see how these things could be solved. And another question, which you can see, once you've got the first question, you can see how the others flow automatically in line with that. With respect to your business or cooperative, has the adherence to financial regulation, including phase, been a barrier or challenge when entering into the industry? Surprisingly, 33 said no, considering how problems were. Yes, some say it's too expensive to comply with, and another 30, so 60% say the difficulty trying to comply with it's too expensive and too complex. So we need to make it simpler, so with that we can go forward. So it's not that the industry is not aware of this, but at least it's been now confirmed again, and from that you can now have additional research projects from government. Regulation compliance, which of the following skills improvements would you find most beneficial? Now, it's difficult if you say that compliance is my biggest one with skills, because there isn't a skill called compliance, but it's interesting to see what the SMEs think is the area they need to put the most effort in, and it's quite refreshing to see how correctly they've identified it. And that the main thing that concerns them is how to ensure that the client we're dealing with gets the right product. So it's quite good that that's what they understand it to be under those circumstances. So that's the research that we've been doing on, not myself, another unit has been doing. The other project which is still going out is the impact study. So I think by the end of this financial year, this would have delivered what it was going to deliver. So we've delivered the goods. We are really on this today. We're really on that last one of research, which was of interest to the industry, and coupled with that is interneting and networking with other academics and people doing research. So it's really, that's the focus which this is concentrating on. It's on your research agenda. So how would I see that we can meet those other two requirements? I think that the way we would do it is the way that academics would normally do that. We have this agenda, this research this year. I was, in my view, say this is a pilot of what should come, but system slightly different going forward. So we should have an annual research-based conference. So that means that academics who've done research in insurance get the opportunity to present that research to people who are working in the industry. Hopefully it will also be people working in the industry who have got research objectives and research queries, and then they can come present it at that conference. We have done this in another instance, which I can tell you about. It started 70 years ago and still going strong. So we've got 70 years to catch up with the other one, but done quite well. It works better when we know every year it's the same time, same space. So if an academic says, look, I know on 1st of January, or that's a bit early, 1st of February, there will be a research conference, and I can then plan my research and complete it, and then be ready to present it. If it's called at sudden and short notice, it's very difficult for academics to put it together. And then what you do is you invite submissions of proper research papers to be presented. So unlike today, where it's just myself and INSETA and Donald Denny, make it broader, so if anybody's got a research topic. So hopefully, if we do it, as you'll see when we end up at the end of the next presentation, we say, okay, we do it next year, about 5 or 6 problems which arise out of COVID, so we can have a proper detailed research at that one. And that way, we think that we can foster research between industry and the universities. And then we have to do what INSETA had thought was a good idea, which I think is an absolutely excellent idea. And we started working in that direction, but we didn't get to complete it. And that is on your own plan, is to create a repository for research and research material. So anything that we do, it's like a Wikipedia type of thing. When you're doing research, if you find an interesting article, you can capture it into the database. And if the article itself is in the public domain, you can deposit it in the repository. And then you can put some keywords or full text research, so if anybody else is looking for it, then you can say, I could find it. Now, if we had that in the lockdown, then we would have been able to carry on without any problem at all. Wits University has a very active program of digitalization, so if we needed anything from the digital program, and there's quite a few reports that I need to finish some report, I would have been able to go to the librarian and say, okay, we want to have these digitized. Once they're digitized, public domain documents, we put them in a repository. And then when we have students can access them. When the students themselves are doing research, they can add to the repository. So I want to make it like Wikipedia. Anybody work with it, you add to it. Anybody want to use it, you use it. It's in the public domain. So that's, I thought, it wasn't my idea, by the way. It's INSETA's idea. I just said, I think it's the most fantastic idea I have had, even if I pinched it from somebody else. We started, and we've had quite a lot of conversations with our Wits librarian and at IT, and we think we can do it quite quickly and quite seamlessly. And we think we should get it going, and then we transfer the things physically to INSETA, so it's under their control, but we can access it from around the world, so we can control it from there. So an absolutely excellent idea. Any researcher can access it and add to it, and it's the opportunity for academics and research-minded individuals to network and discuss matters of interest. So I think an annual research conference would work out quite well. We would be able to achieve it, what we've done quite well. As I say, we did this, started 70 years ago. I think 50 years ago, we did the conference, the South African Finance Association. It meets same time every year in Cape Town. It's now got a journal. Editor is at Wits, editor-in-chief is at Wits. There are sub-editors appointed, I think, now in 4 continents, and it's a leading financial journal in South Africa, and it's fast becoming one of the leading journals in the world. So there's a system to be able to achieve it. We just take a while. Hopefully not 50 years or 70 years, but we can do it. I would like, insurance practice is actually very academic. There's a lot of things of great interest and of great importance which happens in the insurance industry, which has never ever been captured, never been documented. And so I would, in this process, like to encourage people in the industry to start capturing this type of work. So, for example, we have had a major problem about 2 years ago with premium collection. So I want to know, well, how does premium collection work? You won't find that anywhere. It's not documented, it's there, but it's in the minds of people in the industry. And so quite fortunate, I knew the people involved. So I had a student who was doing the research, could get hold of the people involved and said, look, come sit around the table here, let's discuss it, let's record it, and let's capture it. Now, that's the type of stuff which we should have captured a long time. One of the most famous things in South Africa, case law, if you read it, you don't know it. They're always talking about it, and Dawn doesn't like it, so I have to be careful when I say the word. It's the multi-mark insurance policy. Where did it come from? Now, a couple of years ago, I wanted to know, so I found out where it came from. I went to interview the people. I've taken recordings, and they are all now dead. I've still got the recordings. It's never been documented, so we don't have a record of where it came from, what happened to it. Or we can read a court case and say it's a multi-peril policy. We don't know anything more about it. That's the type of information which I think that is be very, very valuable and interesting to capture, which I think the industry should make a contribution. And as I say, if we have a research conference, then hopefully other universities will also get involved, and therefore we'll be able to get research. One of the things that we have problems with, we have academically at Wits, and Albert and people in the insurance division will know, is insurance is not taught at all universities, so it's not a well-known academic discipline. So when you want to publish anything, it's very difficult to find a journal that will publish it, because none of them are focused to what we are actually doing. So we have to change our focus a little bit to be able to pick it up. Okay.
5 minutes, 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, then I can go. Okay. Okay, let's see if I push and see how many slides are left. Okay, oh yeah, this is very important. Okay, I'll do this one. This is like this is quite important. What I've said to you is basically what Lloyd's itself has done, but in different routes. We can see what they've done. They have, I won't read the whole lot, but I will read the second one, which is much more important because we're coming to that a little bit later. But it's quite important. Is Lloyd's has developed what they call a centre of excellence. And there you can see part of that is to have academic partnerships. So INSETA has done what Lloyd's has done. I don't know whether Lloyd's pinched it from INSETA or they've pinched it, but they've recognized, let's have a unit where we can do this research. So part of what I would have in mind is we link up with pieces like Lloyd's. But the second one is much more important. So for all the academics here, just read the second one. What Lloyd's has decided is that if there isn't any academic article which makes a contribution to insurance, send it to them and they will adjudicate it. And if in their opinion it's valuable, the best in the world that year, they will give a prize. So hopefully we work towards it, get the academic articles published, send it to Lloyd's, and we win a prize for having the best academic article insurance for the world. So that's a link up with other institutions which we can make. I'll refer to this again a little bit later on, so just remember that one which we have got.
Oh, wow.
Wow. That's it, okay. So.
Okay, we do have 5 to 10 minutes for questions before the break. I do want to thank both INSETA. Thank you, Ms. Gugunkiza, for gracing us with your presence today. Thank you for also graciously embracing this project and letting us continue with this work with Adeline, which has been very long, but it's been really great and exciting. Please, if anybody has questions or comments before we go to a break, before we welcome our keynote speaker today, you're welcome. There we go. So, sorry, I can't see your name, so I'm going to let you just press the mic and then address the question.
Thank you very much. My name is Lawrence Mkwanas. I'm the president of the African Financial Intermediary Association. The work, began, and I want to say thank you to the new CEO here of INSETA, Gugunkiza, and the presentation by the professor here. What I want to point out is, and that would seek to enhance this good initiative that has been started by Wits University as well as INSETA. We come from the sector, or the part of the population that, has been locked down even before the lockdown. When I say that we want to add the voice so that whatever research methodologies that are utilized, they don't miss the bigger picture of the people that are outside of the insurance net, who will then perpetually be out of the insurance net, because insurance, is a national asset, which is an enabler. Now, when you look at, the take-up of insurance to the close to 80% of the population, which happens to be black, the take-up is very, very, very low. Not because, that is not a necessity, but because of the methods that we used, before to bring insurance to, the different sectors of the population, which has got, to change in order to ensure that this bigger part of the populace does have experience, of insurance. So we are looking now at presenting insurance virtually. The sector that by and large, we deal with, even averse, to, switching the computer on, and we're talking fourth industrial revolution, and we're talking presenting things virtually. These are the people who still believe by and large in face-to-face interaction. And I am bringing these observations because I also sit, on one of the committees within the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. The market, conduct committee, where, even the interventions of trying to regulate the industry, are somehow misaligned. Where there's a lot of unintended consequences that could actually happen, simply because we're doing things at the academic level. I mean, academia myself, and, we've got to take a step back and, ensure that the people that have been left out, what methodologies are we employing to ensure that those people, are brought in. And as a parting shot, I'm very much mindful of your time, One is coming from an empirical evidence here, not an academic exercise. You look at the attraction of individuals that would go and study insurance, or that would take insurance as a profession. Again, the attraction there is very low because of the lack of understanding and of the lack of the role models that are actually making it in this industry. So if you don't have, people that are taking this as a course to go back and enlighten those masses as to the importance of insurance, and then you're fighting a self-defeating exercise here. But there is so much, and I'm glad that we've begun to talk, about such things. And Rome was not built in one day. But one guy said, it's because I was not there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was quite loaded as a question, but I think maybe Prof. Vivian, you can take the part about exclusivity and to academic, and maybe INSETA, you can take the digital divide and mindset one, or you can negotiate amongst yourselves which part. I mean, I heard it was very loaded, some jargon I didn't even understand because I'm not in insurance.
No, so I think those observations were very, very valid. So I have no further comment, but they were valid. Thanks.
Just in terms of the digital divide, there's a lot currently happening in the digital space, and INSETA has partnered with a digital chair, And I'd love for Lawrence Mkonazi to join us on our task team if he's got information to share, especially about small businesses, how they are impacted, the digital divide, and how we could improve. And we always ask for people from the sector to support us at these think tank discussions. So Lawrence, we would be grateful to have you come on board and share with us your views further to this. Thanks.
Thanks, Lawrence, for your input. Very valid. But I also just want to highlight that the insurance SETA has been clustered with the MICT and the services SETA on the digitization and technology under the economic reconstruction and recovery plan. And I think your contribution to some of the discussions will be valuable, because that is where I think we will be able to address some of the concerns that you have raised. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that does summarize it nicely, and obviously there'll be more thinking and more meetings and plans. I don't know if there's any other comments or questions from the floor. Yes, Dr. Mushai.
Press this one. Yeah. Just mine is not a comment, but just to put a bit of icing on what has already been said and contributed to. On the issue of over-regulation, there is a huge problem, because regulation is not costless, but at the same time you can't measure it in terms of what value it is bringing. What is enough regulation? It's very difficult. I'm reminded of what Bill Clinton and Tony Blair did when they assumed presidency and prime ministership, respectively. These guys attempted to actually pass a law that seeks to measure the impact of regulation before it is imposed on a particular industry. Herculean task. I've lost track of what they did and how much they were able to achieve what they wanted to do. Huge challenges. The other thing that I want to point out is that huge challenges lie ahead. Indeed, the point has been made of exclusion. And part of the exclusion problem has been a historical legacy of insurance, in the sense that it presupposed that you have to own something. So if I'm a man of straw, I don't have anything, it's very difficult for me to go and say I'm buying insurance. Insurance for what? I don't have anything. Right? But the frontiers have been pushed more now. We now have micro insurance, which speaks to the specific needs of the excluded. They also live in risk environments, unfortunately. But you go to the formal market, there is simply nothing there for you. The last point that I want to make is in recognition of the INSETA CEO being here. And she is a woman taking over from Adeline, and there is an important point that I want to raise here, having been involved in insurance education for, how long has it been, Prof, since you stole me from where I was? Close to 20 years now. What I've tended to see since joining VETS is that the people who excel in insurance are ladies. I'm trying to think right now, say, who were the people who have dominated the prize giving? We have a prize given by Hollard Insurance. I hope someone is here. That prize has been dominated by ladies. So, what does that tell us about our industry? We are trying to
encourage these ladies who excel in our industry to actually study for higher degrees. That's one of the biggest challenges that I face today. Trying to make them cross that bridge to see the value of higher education. Because we want them to be able to think not only locally, but at a much higher and strategic and global level. So, yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Mike, I don't know if we've got questions from our virtual participants, and then if not, I see a hand, and then I'm wondering if we should take a break and come back, or if you're gonna make it nice and short. But you know us ladies, we can be short, we can, so. Do you want to go now, next session? Okay. Okay, so what we'll do now is just take a quick break, stretch our legs, grab coffee. You can bring it back here, grab a bottle of water, and I've already said where the bathrooms are. And for those joining us virtually, please don't forget to send your questions to mike.stewart@vets.ac.za. Thank you, Adeline. You've emailed me enough in live. Thank you. Thank you. See you back at 11.
Can we just add the Wi-Fi password and username on the door if
Yes.
you want to connect to Wi-Fi?
Yes, it's on the door. And then I can read it out quickly. It's 659924. But you can all read when you pass by. Thank you. We'll be back at 11:15. 11:15, yes.
1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2.
Is it on you? Just you control it.
Okay. Welcome, Donald. Donald is a renowned litigation lawyer with over 30 years' experience in healthcare litigation in South Africa. Furthermore, he is highly regarded in the industry for his litigation work in insurance and reinsurance, product liability and recall, regulatory advertising standards authority, consumer protection, and class action disputes. Donald was previously the Managing Director, then CEO, of Norton Rose Fulbright, South Africa, and before that, Head of Norton Rose Fulbright South Africa's Disputes Group. He is now director at Norton Rose Fulbright in its insurance practice. He is constantly listed, amongst others, Chalmers Global as a leading litigation lawyer, Who's Who, Insurance and Reinsurance, and as a leading insurance and regulation practitioner, and Legal 500 as a leading dispute practitioner, and was listed as Insurance Lawyer of the Year 2015 by Best Lawyers for South Africa. In Chalmers Global 2018, Donald was listed as the sole eminent practitioner for dispute resolution with the comment, Donald Dinney maintains an impressive reputation in the sector for his depth of experience in a range of contentious disputes. He is particularly well regarded Fulbright's blog posts and is regularly represented to write articles for a variety of insurance publications, medical-related journals, and other print media. Donald obtained his BA LLB and HDIP Company Law from the University of Witwatersrand and Certificate in Medicine and the Law from UNISA UP. He is a member of the Law Societies of the Northern Provinces, KwaZulu-Natal and Cape Province. Welcome, Donald.
Not yet, now you can. Thank you for the kind and necessary introduction. It's always good to be reminded of what I'm meant to be doing. I thought today I'm going to take you through just a potted history and review of business interruption insurance and its structure of the policy. I'm going to talk obviously in general terms and not focus on particular wordings. Obviously bear in mind that different insurers have slightly different wordings, although the principles that I'll talk to today are common amongst those policies. But I think it's useful to bear those in mind and just remind ourselves of the structure of business interruption policies and perhaps some of the sticking points in the policies when you're going to have a discussion about what's worthwhile researching in this particular context and what arises from a recent spate of South African judgments and obviously judgments around the world, which focus obviously on the non-damage extensions to the business interruption cover, but have much broader consequences both in context and specifically to the business interruption section of the policy and broadly in respect of insurance and its judgments in a much more detailed analysis of a raft of policy wordings, including prevention of access and prevention of use clauses, has significant consequences for policy wordings and are worthy of consideration and further review as well. Let's have a look at the slides then. Thanks very much. A reminder that obviously the business interruption section of the policy is usually found in a commercial policy for covering these particular circumstances where these particular elements are met. So you need to have some type of interruption in the business as defined for the period of indemnity as defined, subject to the limits of indemnity as well, and usually it requires material damage. The material damage element is an important element of business interruption policy and its definition when you look at it in the context of extensions to that wording as well, and particularly to non-damage extensions to the wording. It requires a trigger event. You look at the operative clause, the trigger event is usually material damage as defined. This is an example of the defined event section in a policy. The variations of this, often 1 and 2 of the wordings would refer to the property section of the policy or to the fire section of the policy. This is slightly different but doesn't affect the general principles that we want to talk about. As I said, there must be a loss, and there's obviously some debate and lots of case law about what a loss is in insurance context following interruption or interference with the business. You would have seen that the United Kingdom Supreme Court judgment deals with an interpretation of what interruption constitutes in the context of a BI policy, and it's useful again if you're considering an aspect of research in that regard to have a look at the discussion of the court in that regard, which ultimately found that interruption doesn't need a complete cessation of the business. A partial interruption is sufficient. In consequence of damage, again, there's been some debate, lots of case law once again, and lots of debate in the non-damage litigation that ensued in South Africa and around the world as to the meaning of in consequence of, generally accepted by our courts and those around the world, and in consequence requires proximate cause or proximate loss, and obviously there's a whole lot of case law and debate in that regard. Once again, also, both our Supreme Court of Appeal judgments and the UK Supreme Court, in the way it dealt with proximate loss and proximate cause, is novel to some respects, and it's worthwhile considering and just researching that aspect of the judgments and its effect on, potential effect on proximate cause in the way ahead, not simply for business interruption insurance, but for insurance policies and insurance law generally as well. It must occur during the period of insurance, standard for a policy. There's some judgments, UK judgments to do with, I'll take you to those as to, there was a subsistence problem where there was an infestation of roots, and there was some debate as to whether that occurred before or after or during the period of insurance. Ultimately, it didn't make any difference because of the way the court dealt with it, but it does highlight the need to make sure that obviously that the operative cause, the insured event, does occur during the period of insurance. And respective at the premises, the premises is important because that's defined in the policy once again, is usually the business premises as defined, but that references consequences again for the extensions to the business interruption section of the policy, and I'll come to that. Also significantly, that always gets forgotten, or tends to be forgotten, is there must have been payment or liability admitted under one of these other sections of the policy. So business interruption insurance, which is usually a section to commercial policy, always has to be read in context of and together with other sections, whether it is the property damage section, the fire section of the policy, and requires, before business interruption section can respond, for there to be properly an indemnity payable under that primary property material damage section of the policy. And that history, and I think that context, has been lost to some extent in the debate and the judgments when they've been analysing the non-damage extensions of the policy. So another thing to perhaps earmark in terms of research projects in the context of the general and original purpose of business interruption cover and its defined event and the consequences of the extensions, particular non-damage extensions in that particular context. So you'll see that on this particular rating there must be a response under either the theft section, the money section, the glass section, goods in transit. As I say, much more traditionally, you'll have a response under the fire or the property section, or a defined event under the actual accidental damage section of this particular policy, with some provisos. We don't need to dwell on those for the moment. And this proviso is equally important in respect, but only in respect of perils insured under the fire section hereof, or those additional perils stated in the schedule. The additional perils stated in the schedule will usually be those extensions that are referred to under the extensions to the policy. But most significantly then, you require some form of material damage and caused by a peril insured under the fire section of the policy. So it isn't simply an all-risk cover where anything goes, anything is covered and the policy responds to any form of interruption of the particular business. The business needs to have suffered at the premises material damage by a defined peril, for example. This policy doesn't, but often policies do define what damage is, what damage means, what damage is required, often referring to physical or direct material or physical damage as well. It's quite clear through all the policy wordings and the case law that traditional operative clause and the business interruption section of the policy requires some form of material damage at or to the premises. Which is interesting because Prof. Vivian has referred to the after litigation that is carrying on in the States at the moment in response regarding COVID claims. That is a traditional claim under this general operative clause where the insureds, they are trying to squeeze the claim into this defined event alleging that COVID constitutes some form of material damage at the premises. And we'll see how those cases develop. So, to date, as mentioned, essentially by way of exception, the American courts have generally non-suited the insureds in that regard. Some have allowed the cases to continue, But where you see those judgments saying success with insurer, that's only in the context of permitting the case to proceed to trial so that evidence can be led and arguments can be presented regarding the question of material damage. That question hasn't generally arisen in the South African or other Commonwealth jurisdictions like the United Kingdom. There's a Supreme Court judgment for non-damage extensions in Ireland as well on the same basis, and in Australia, all because those policies contain relevant non-damage extensions. So what you see, the peculiarity in the difference of the markets is that in the States, you don't seem to have these non-damage extensions, hence insureds haven't been able to make their claims under the non-damage extensions under the policies. They've been required to try and shoehorn it into the traditional material damage sections of the policy, while in all the other jurisdictions, including our own, we've had the debates about interpretation of the non-damage sections of the policy. There are a few pieces of litigation I'm busy dealing with in South Africa where insureds don't have the non-damage extensions and are once again trying in various novel ways to shoehorn it into the traditional material damage section, either an operative clause or prevention of access wording under the policy. I'll come back to that, or if I forget to, please remind me. I'm happy to talk a bit about that to the extent that I can. But traditionally, prevention of access extensions, whether they're automatic or require additional payment of premium, also require material damage to the premises or to some form of access facility to the premises. Traditionally, material damage to the roads, for example, providing access to the particularly insured premises. So claims in that context usually fail where the insured is not able to establish that there has been material damage to the surrounding property in those particular circumstances. This is the accidental definition then under the property section of this particular policy. Remember that one of the requirements was under the defined event that there is a claim under the accidental damage section of the policy as an option. To emphasize the point that it's usually material damage that is required, this wording expressly refers to accidental physical loss or damage to the insured property, and usually requires a specification of the insured property as well. There's some debate and there's some case law I might refer to very quickly where judgments, depending on the wording of the particular policy, have said that it's sufficient that there's been accidental physical loss to other property, not necessarily insured property, but property which the insured uses, and that was sufficient in the context of that wording to trigger a claim. But certainly the traditional wording requires, in some form or another, this physical loss or damage to insured property which is specified in the schedule. And it must be by one of these insured perils. Remember that it must be an insured peril under the fire section of the policy. This is not a comprehensive list of all the perils for this particular policy, but it's fairly commonly found among the wording. And it's all the traditional type of insured perils which you would expect to see when dealing with property damage. So fire, lightning, storm, wind, water, flood, earthquake, etc., etc. And all of those in the particular context you will appreciate from a reading of that list require and ultimately result in some form of physical damage to the insured property. Our judgments, the South African judgments, generally when dealing with the question of physical damage and what is required, outside, the courts haven't dealt with it in the context of business interruption insurance. They've dealt with it in other contexts, but have generally required for there to be physical damage, there to be some form of physical alteration to the particular insured property. So it isn't simply loss of use that is sufficient. It does require some form of structural alteration in the makeup, the physical makeup of the property for there to be physical damage. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of the various case law in the States once they deal with this particular question. So another point to earmark in terms of perhaps research in that context. I refer to originally the state insurance judgment where, depending on the particular wording, it might be sufficient that it's not property insured but properly used by the insured. The facts of this are interesting because this dealt with a ski resort that insured and had business interruption insurance in respect of its particular premises and business. There had been a loss of seasonal business because there was volcanic eruptions which melted the snow. Obviously, snow isn't insured property, and there's a long debate in the judgment about whether it can ever be insured property, but the court, again, having regard to that particular wording of the insuring clause, said it was sufficient in that particular context. But obviously, somewhat unusual both in terms of its facts and in terms of the wording. I also alluded to the Cree-Church judgment where there was some debate as to whether the damage had occurred prior to the period of insurance. Here the insurer had argued that there had been an encroachment of roots and subsidence caused prior to the commencement of the indemnity period, therefore the policy wasn't required to respond. I think ultimately on the facts the court determined that had been both prior and intra the period of insurance, and therefore that was sufficient to trigger the claim in these particular circumstances. If you're familiar with the structure of the business interruption policy, you'll have the section of defined events as I referred you to, and then immediately following that are two specific conditions. Specific condition 1, which deals with liquidation, and there's another one I'll come to regarding general duties to mitigate and take necessary steps to notify, etc., etc. This is the kind of general wording that you'll find under specific condition 1 and sometimes causes some confusion as to the consequences where an insured has gone into liquidation. All that this clause means is it doesn't affect an already accrued claim. So where you have a defined event under business interruption of the section of the policy entitling the insured to claim, and subsequent to that the insured goes into liquidation, this doesn't affect the entitlement to claim in respect to that particular claim. What it really deals with is a material change in risk, akin to that type of clause that you might find generally in policies regarding material change in risks entitling an insurer, where there has been such a change because it negatively affects the insurer's risk to then terminate the insurance. Obviously, the question of whether a particular insured has gone into liquidation post the accrued event might talk to the question of quantification of the particular claim, but not to the fact of the entitlement to claim under the policy. We haven't seen those debates yet in the context of the Covid-19 claims have been made up. Those will come up in the course now of assessment of claims every now and again. There is a clear wording that you'll see talked about in the textbook and some of the judgments where if there is an intention as an insurer to exclude circumstances where there's an accrued claim, but there's nevertheless subsequent liquidation, where the wording clearly has to be different. The debate and discussion about obligations to notify events that might give rise to a claim and the facts of the claim and the various time-bound provisions under the policy, separate to the general prescription periods under a law of prescription, have been and are continually the subject of some debate and consideration by our courts. So the wordings that are referred to here are not peculiar to business interruption sections of the policy. This is found in the general conditions of the policy, so obviously applies across all the sections. It'll be familiar to many of you. It's an obligatory shall, must give notice to the company, that's the insurer obviously, and that's happening in any event that may result in a claim. Particulars of it to the insured. The variations always of this under the particular notification provisions. Some talk about as soon as reasonably possible, others talk about as reasonably practical, others specify a particular time limit. And generally our courts will consistently say, well, that wording is pretty clear and it means you need to comply with it in order to be entitled to claim under the policy. There are other obligations in terms of notification, providing assistance referred to under that wording as well. There are provisions regarding the expiry of claims. So these are contractual time bars, contractual prescription periods, different to obviously the statutory prescription period of 3 years under the Prescription Act. Usually this type of period, as you will see, is excluded when you're dealing with business interruption claims. Often it's also excluded when dealing with liability claims as well. In addition to that is the traditional time bar clause as well, and the variations of that. Quite often it is a 6-month period requiring legal action to be instituted within 6 months of a rejection of a claim, otherwise the claim is forfeit. Some policies might, in the wording itself, allow for a 90-day period for making representations following the rejection of the claim, mirroring the periods referred to and dealt with in the policyholder protection rules. But bearing in mind that, having regard to the various iterations of the protection rules, those rules don't generally apply to commercial policies. They apply to, in its wording, commercial lines policies or commercial policies which are subject to where the insured's asset value annual turnover is below or equal to the monetary threshold set out in the Consumer Protection Act, which from day one has been 2 million rand and hasn't ever changed. So it doesn't give protection to most insureds under commercial lines policies. Again, a long line of case law as to what that means, particularly Constitutional Court, you might recall in the Barkhuizen judgment, where there was an attack in terms of public policy on this type of wording. The court said it isn't inherently unreasonable. It depends on the particular facts of the case, and the insured would be required, bearing the onus, to put up the appropriate facts to show that in the particular instance, the particular time bar clause, or going back the notification clause, would be unreasonable, unfair, and contrary to public policy. The recent judgment in Baedeker, you might recall that as well, not in an insurance context, but it involved a bit of a tussle between the Supreme Court of Appeal and the Constitutional Court regarding questions of public policy and applications of that. I think ultimately the Constitutional Court rather diplomatically sought to reconcile the pronouncements of the Supreme Court Appeal in dealing with Baedeker and then ultimately on appeal as well, but essentially found that principles of public policy, reasonableness, fairness, Ubuntu just inform questions of public policy and don't constitute standalone elements of interpretation of policies, insurance policies or contracts in that particular case. So what Baedeker doesn't do is alter really the legal position on interpretation of time bar clauses in insurance contracts, for example. Those are the general conditions contained in the general section of the policy, but apply across the board, including to the business interruption section of the policy. But what the structure of the policy does is make express under specific condition 2 as well, that the insured needs to comply with general conditions 7 and 8, and those are, 7 was one of the conditions I referred you to as well. This is broader than that, because it also requires a duty to minimize and mitigate loss. That's an inherent duty of every insured as a general principle of contract law in any event, but this is a clear contractual obligation to mitigate as well. And what this particular clause does is that no claim under the section, that's the business interruption section, shall be payable unless the terms of a specific condition have been complied with, and non-compliance, etc., if there's been a payment already. And obviously the section, the terms of the specific condition include the obligation to comply with general condition 7, for example, the notification and time bar provisions, and this wording in effect renders compliance in those particular wordings, conditions precedent to any insurer's liability under the policy. Entitling where there is a breach, the insurer to deny the claim in that particular context. You haven't seen generally in the current spate of COVID litigation, I've got some, but under the main litigation that's been reported in the judgments, the insurers tended to agree with, or put out general indulgences to insureds that provided they had complied with their first stage notification obligations under the policy, that then the running of the various time bar provisions would be interrupted until specified dates. So you as an insured under COVID-19 claims as a general proposition would have to have complied with the notification provision I referred you to under general condition 7A1, usually it is, but once you've done that, the running of all the other time periods would have been suspended subject to a particular specified date, and those have tended to be extended over time as well, pending the outcome of the litigation as well. But there have been some insureds who haven't suspended that running, and where these type of issues will become important in ongoing litigation claims under COVID-19, but obviously they're important considerations more broadly under BI claims and under insurance claims much more generally. I touched on the alternative triggers to cover. So primarily, business interruption requires material damage. That is the primary trigger under the policy, but there might be alternative triggers to cover, both either automatic or in terms of which an insured can purchase that particular extension for usually a minimal additional premium. Those extensions are usually all subject to their own sublimits, either expressed as percentages of the main amount insured or a specified sublimit on the schedule to the policy, and also usually to separate indemnity periods as well. So under the general structure of the business interruption schedule, you will have cover for a period of 12 months, for example, for a specified amount of turnover, but the subsections dealing with these particular extensions will usually limit that in effect and say, well, you have only 3 months cover, for example, for a particular non-damage cover and subject to a sublimit within the main limit of indemnity as well, and that's fairly common. If you look at the policies, and this one is not atypical, there are probably 16 automatic extensions and 10 additional extensions you can buy for an amount. And so you consider you're dealing with, 26 additional extensions of various sorts to business interruption cover, which really require consideration and understanding. And you've seen the consequences in the context of COVID-19, where one of the non-damage extensions, infectious disease extension, has become, and over the years, simply been added and increased, cover has been increased under that particular extension, particularly where that wording requires a particular infection within a radius from 5 kilometers to 10 to 20 to 15, etc., etc. In situations where those extensions and the extent of the cover has been added, I suppose, really as a result of market competition and pressure, where a broker comes to an insurer and says, insurer X will give me this lovely suite of extensions under the business interruption section, why don't you, or you giving only 5 kilometers radius, but insurer B is giving 50, and why don't you do the same thing? And in consequence of that, those extensions have simply proliferated and increased in terms of the extent of the cover, without, I think, much thought being given to the consequences of it. Often those extensions are not paid business interruption section, or for a very small, with consequences like you've seen under in the context of the debate about the interpretation of the infectious disease extensions for COVID-19 and the insurer's stated intention regarding the cover versus clearly the context of when there's a claim and insured's contrary interpretation of what's been given. A lot of the business interruption section deals with then the mechanism of the quantification of the particular business interruption claim and what is actually insured under that. It's usually profits in some sort. Sometimes there's a wording that gives loss of revenue generally or loss of rental as well, but usually it is gross profits on a depending on the basis, a difference basis, for example. It's on the face of it a simple calculation when one has regard to what the profits were, the gross profits were in the coming years. You pay a premium when you're writing the cover on that particular figure, and then of course there's always scope for the application of average in the particular context. I'll take you a bit more to the question of average. This is a traditional gross profit difference basis wording, for example. So you can see it sets out the mechanism for calculation of the particular claim. And it's important to bear in mind that obviously an insurance policy is a contract between two parties, the insured and the insurer. one has regard to the terms of that particular contract to determine what indemnity is payable and on what terms, and how the amount of the indemnity is to be calculated. So often the trap in business interruption claims is to simply default to general accounting principles, which play an important role in the determination of quantum, but forgetting the fact that actually the terms of this contract set out the mechanism, the methodology for determining, for example, in this context, gross profit difference basis, and it might deviate from general accounting principles in certain circumstances. So it's important to have regard to them, but more importantly, obviously, more important to have regard to the particular wording of the contract in the particular context. And you'll see we're looking at reduction of turnover and also at the question of increased cost of workings, which is built in. There's a whole definition of what increased cost of workings is, which forms part of the limit of indemnity insured under the policy. I pause to mention that because there is usually an extension automatic under the policy where there is cover usually specified for a particular amount for additional increase in cost of workings, which then might and often does lead to a debate as to whether that's additional to the limit of indemnity under the policy or not. And most importantly, there is, when you're doing the calculation, it's less any sum saved during the indemnity period, and there's a whole formulation in that regard. With the proviso here, you will see that the amount payable shall be proportionally reduced to the sum insured in respect to gross profit is less than the sum produced by applying the rate of gross profit, etc. This is in effect an average clause which is inserted into the business interruption section of the policy. So you might find under the broader wordings a traditional average clause contained in the general conditions of the policy, but don't forget, and it's useful to have consideration too, the average clause actually expressly and specifically provided for here, and whatever the basis for the calculation is, this is simply repeated in the wordings. The average is applied where in fact you find that the insured has, in asking for the cover and placing the cover, underestimated what their future profit would be over the next whatever period. So often you might have a debate in this context, and you're going to have the debate, and you've seen that debate in the COVID-19 claims of questions of under insurance and obviously an exposure, and you get to questions of duty on the broker in this particular context as to how they advise their client, the insured, as to how to calculate the insured sum appropriately, bearing in mind this risk of exposure for the application of average in the calculation. And this is a mechanism in a calculation that's often misunderstood when you're looking at claims and how claims are being formulated. An alternative basis for placing the business far less common, you don't see it very often, is in a declaration-linked basis, and obviously you see that often in construction policies, for example, engineering policies, where it might be placed on a declaration basis. Some here can talk far better about that than I can, but we essentially estimate your gross profits for the coming year, and you pay a premium interim premium, and obviously when you get to the end of the 12 months, you take a look back, see what it actually has been. If you're off, then you adjust the premium on a certain basis, subject to an uplift that might be capped at a particular percentage specified in the policy. But I haven't come across it very frequently under business interruption cover at all. Some of you might have, and can maybe share some of those experiences. There's a lot in the policy dealing with the mechanism for quantification. This is another of the sections, and you can see there are what some might consider in terminal definitions of standard turnover and revenue and gross rentals, and definitions within definitions, for example, that you need to get your head around. We talked about savings having been taken into account. Equally, the policy here in this particular wording says you need to make adjustment essentially for trends. So this is the infamous trends clause for those of you who have mixed, and you can't use the trends clause, say our courts now consistently, subject to changing their minds again, to exclude a claim in terms of the operation of an insured peril. Obviously, in the non-damage COVID litigation, much of the debate was, and the complaint was, that the trends clause had been sought to apply to actually exclude the peril which was insured, and therefore it becomes a circular argument. And the court's found a way in its analysis, which Prof. Vivian will, if we give him a chance, will go on about for another few hours as to how to interpret that in a particular way. Whether or not you agree with that approach, that's a very important area to have a look at and have regard, research to, not simply because its effect on business interruption claims, but because its effect generally, in infectious disease claims, but because its effect much more broadly in terms of wide area catastrophe claims. So we're talking in a peculiar blinkered context, obviously COVID-19 claims, but if you look at its application, for example, to floods, hurricanes, wide area fires, the way that our courts have now sought to interpret and apply trench clauses has particular negative consequences for insurers in terms of, on its current wording, significantly expanding the insurance, positive for insureds because it goes to expand it. How reinsurers will then respond to that in terms of its rates and its requirements will remain to be seen. What you're seeing already in the context, and it's probably just of COVID-19 generally, but no doubt also in the context of the COVID-19 judgments that you're seeing around the world, that reinsurers have been, into renewal period, significantly increasing reinsurance premiums to its insurance clients across the board. And I've seen and heard about percentages from 20 to even 100%, depending on what the particular cover is, and it might be even more in certain contexts. Under any policy, obviously, and significantly go once again in the context of the recent litigation, is the question of causation and what is to be applied in that particular context and what the test is. The trigger for loss is the occurrence of the insured peril, and usually the traditional approach is that material damage must prove that the business interruption loss was the result of the material damage and was proximately caused by the insured peril, and obviously not because of the insured's own commercial decision. So in the COVID-19 non-damage litigation, there's been significant debate as to causation and what causation is required in this particular context and what the proximate cause test means interpreted. And what you've found, particularly in the UK SC judgment, is a reworking and reinterpretation of elements of the proximate cause test, which will have significant consequences, not simply once again for business interruption, but again I think is an area which is well worth highlighting and marking for research as to how the courts, both our Supreme Court of Appeal and the UK SC, and to supposed to extent the Irish Supreme Court, approached and reworked and reimagined the proximate cause test in these particular cases. And they've certainly expanded it so it isn't the proximate cause test which in the insurance industry and insurance lawyers might be familiar with. So it does need important consideration. All of these things, by the way, also in terms of research projects and I know various role-players in the industry we're involved in, and looking at the consequences for and the effect of this spate of judgments around the world on policy wordings and how you need to revisit and look at your policy wordings, not simply because of the effect that it has on business interruption cover, but in terms of the application of the general principles arising from the judgments that I referred you to generally on policies. So these things like the approach to the trends clause has got a much wider application than BI cover. The approach to proximate cause and causation has a much broader significant consequence for insurance policies across the board, which needs to be looked at in terms of the particular wording. The interpretation of the Supreme Court Appeal, for example, is what constitutes interruption as a consequence for the meaning of interruption in the particular context, which may require a reworking of wordings. The UK Supreme Court judgment and that test case dealt with much broader issues than the South African litigation has. So it dealt not simply with the non-damage wordings that you'll be familiar with, but also with prevention of access, loss of use, interruption clauses under extensions to the policy as well. And there are significant findings in that context as well in the interpretation of that court as to what prevention of access, loss of use means as well, which means everyone needs to go back and have a look at those interpretations in the context of the extensions and wordings traditionally used in these policies, these sections, and elsewhere as well. I've talked on the trends clause, and then we can talk for hours about it. Just to emphasize, the findings essentially say the sole function of the clause is to calculate the loss suffered, not to determine the question of liability or interpret the defined event section under the policy. All of these judgments have, to varying degrees, fairly extensive consideration and analysis of it. The most extensive, and I say probably the most useful one, is the UK SC judgment. Have a look at there. There are a whole lot of sections on it, including a whole section where, paradoxically, two of the judges sitting on the Supreme Court, Flo and Harbour, and I think one of them was the counsel arguing the matter in Orient Express, another one was the arbitrator or the appeal judge, I can't recall which, in the Orient Express case, which obviously found opposite to what they did in this context, and there's a whole kind of mea culpa and an interesting discussion, if you want to be entertained, as to, well, how judges can change their mind over a period of time. There's a line of cases not dealt with recently in COVID-19, but when you're looking at the trends clause, obviously look at the particular trend over a long period of time, and you can take into account perhaps gains made outside the indemnity period. Just to digress slightly on the New World, not Work, Harbourview case and the question of determination, the calculation of revenue. The trigger event in that case wasn't in the context of COVID-19, I think it was SARS. There's an infectious disease clause, but the particular wording required there to have been a government reaction to the infectious disease and it had been declared a notifiable disease by the relevant authority. It was common cause that on the facts of this particular case, the business had actually been interrupted by SARS as it existed, but because, having regard to the operative clause, it hadn't yet been declared a notifiable disease, the trigger event hadn't occurred, so there was no indemnity payable under the policy. By analogy, if you look at the COVID-19 cases we've had, all the courts have consistently said, because they've dealt with the question of the requirement that there be an infection within a specified radius. The radius is varied on the policy terms within the particular insured premises. All of those judgments have consistently said for there to be a claim, there must be the trigger of the event of an infection within the particular radius. Otherwise, there's no claim whatsoever. It's dealt differently as to then the interpretation of what constitutes the insured peril under those operative clauses, and obviously the question of causation. Just to highlight another area of research that you might want to consider, obviously these things are often intertwined, but there is opportunity, I think, for an independent line of consideration as to how courts interpret and approach the interpretation of insurance contracts. Obviously, the judgments over a period of time which generally say, well, they're no different to other contracts and you should treat them no differently and you should apply the general principles of interpretation of contracts to insurance policies. That hasn't happened the way the courts have applied it. Probably the most authoritative and recent one, barring the Cafe Chameleon, was the Centrique judgment, which quite comprehensively and thoroughly sets out, one would have thought, what is the definitive approach to interpreting insurance policies. The Supreme Court of Appeal potentially puts that on its head again, referring to and relying on judgments back in probably the 1920s and 30s, applying interpretation of policies and applying this in a particular case, and to some extent ignoring Centrique. So again, I think an area that might be of interest to and worth considering as to how that approach may or may not have changed, and the danger in interpreting insurance contracts and the risks that and the traps that are there to all the parties, not simply in the context of insurance contracts, but in contracts across the board. Often those principles and those judgments then get conflated and misapplied, I think, to the general operative clause and the general principles of interpretation of the policy, incorrectly so, perhaps. So what you're certainly having, I think, maybe your research will tell me I'm wrong, is a development in the law around the world, both arising from the UK SC judgment and Catholic Communion SC, where you have clear and different and narrower rules of interpretation, or narrow in the sense that they're more expansive, rules for interpreting insurance contracts, which don't apply when you're interpreting other contracts potentially. And it may or may not be, depending on which side of the fence you sit, a worrying development. Not simply for, primarily I think, if you look at all the consequences of the judgments, which maybe a third leg of research is how those judgments and the way the courts have dealt with what is obviously a difficult situation interpretation affect the general principles of certainty which one requires in the law, and how actually one goes about one's business, how one contracts, how determines contracts, and how one runs a business either from an insured point of view or an insurer or even a reinsurer point of view, when you have the willingness of the courts, correctly or not. Fourth leg of analysis is to adopt different principles or to adapt principles of interpretation to achieve different results. Talking about increased what's the wording, let me stop there. Just to mention, I think finally, and I haven't put it up, is the consequences and the effects that you're going to see in terms of the current litigation, obviously, and how it is dealt with by reinsurers as well. You've obviously got the primary policy, the business interruption section I've talked about, and how that reacts to and provides cover to the insured in a particular context. You then have the insurer who in turn obtains its insurance by way of reinsurance from reinsurers, usually in this particular context by catastrophe excess of loss treaties, which provide responses when thresholds have been crossed in terms of underlying cover. But that interesting questions in the context of reinsurance claims under business interruption, and particularly under business interruption claims in the Covid-19 scenario, arise when one's dealing with questions of occurrence, for example, aggregation of the particular event and the loss. And what you see in these reinsurance treaties is the application of what is called the hours clause, which is also important to the question of aggregation. So in very simplistic terms, part of the important and significant reinsurance debate, and I suppose as part of the reasons one's seeing an increase in rates under reinsurance across the board in any event, is the question of, are the various COVID claims one is seeing now and the primary policy responses to that all individual and separate losses which don't fall to be aggregated under the reinsurance treaty, or do they? And that has significant consequences, good and bad, depending on the wording of that treaty and the ability to aggregate for the question of deductible applicable to the treaty and the aggregation, and the application of the hours clause as well. So I've lost count of the research projects, but that's potentially another one in terms of the significance of aggregation hours clauses in the reinsurance context. And I think it's affected by things like interpretation of the proximate cause and the underlying policy, and also things like the application of the trends clause as well. That's a lot. Any questions, comments for now, or those are online?
Thank you very much, Donald. No, thank you for the time you took to actually break the whole concept up. I think people...
Just to break you.
No, I think I'm immune to this because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not in the insurance industry necessarily. We do have, maybe I can start with the questions from, there's two virtual participants that have posed a question. So we've got Prof. Thakur from the Durban University of Technology. I think it's more of a comment. He says, we should consider establishing a holistic knowledge and implementation framework to support SMMEs with the new small home office, SOHO, in brackets, or what we call the work from home, WFH. Our goal must be to allow SMMEs to operate with a similar efficiency of the Hollards and the Dial Direct of this world. The framework must include training and mentoring as well. DUT will support this through the InsurTech research component. Any comments on this? So I think this is more to the floor and to everybody that would like to comment on Prof. Thakur's comment there about SOHO, WF, InsurTech, Hollard, Dial Direct, etc. And then we also just received a comment question from Momelezi Nodada, who says, hi, what is INSETA doing to promote awareness of the insurance industry within South African communities? How can a kid in rural Matatiele be excited by a prospective career in insurance? That's Mr. Momelezi Nodada, who is doing a Bachelor of Commerce, who's an honors student of I think it's insurance, Bachelor of Commerce Insurance. So those are the two comments that, while they're being digested by the floor, if there is immediate questions that can be directed to Mr. Dini, I can take those now. I'm just going to sit here because of even in technology, some things will remain a little bit analog and physical, which is great. So if there's anybody around this presentation, yes, sir. And because I can't see names, you can just say your name and where you're from.
Kobus van Niekerk, Consort Technical Underwriter. Not really a question, but two observations. The indemnity period may often be much less than a period of insurance.
Yes.
And the underwriter may decide at the end of the indemnity period to postpone payment to the end of the period of insurance to see if the claimant hasn't made up some of his loss during the period.
Yeah. What's important, just to pause on that, is you will see, you might have picked up in specific condition 2, usually it requires that the claim must be articulated and finalized within 30 days after the end of the indemnity period, which takes into account, tries to take into account this type of issue, is that the claim accrues, but you're not entitled to actually technically prosecute the claim until the end of the indemnity period, so you can see and articulate what the proper loss is and take into account the question of makeup, for example.
The second observation, your material damage treaties other than motor and liability is normally proportional, and the reinsurers very much dictate the conditions of the primary underlying policies, and even the wordings, like the COVID wording comes from the people like Munich and Swiss and those people, and our hands are bound by the reinsurers in what cover we can give, really.
Well, there's a fascinating, depending on, I suppose it's fascinating for boring lawyers, of history of how that infectious disease clause has developed in the London market, for example, but you're quite correct, I guess, to be applied. But to emphasize your point, you've now seen intra-COVID reinsurers imposing blanket across all policies extensive pandemic and epidemic exclusion wordings, which then have to be ignored. To the extent that you haven't, and it comes to renewal time, insurers are exposed to the extent that they haven't been because of the indemnity period, the period of insurance, which hasn't overlapped with the period of reinsurance, where they've been exposed because they've had exclusions because of the application of a very broad pandemic epidemic exclusion by reinsurers, which is then getting knocked on to underlying insureds.
Thank you.
Just in terms of the general comments that have come in terms of education, obviously important, you see it in the context of business interruption, because there's been a little known, or certainly a little profiled section of the policy until COVID-19 claims come along, and it's apparent that there is a huge gap of knowledge and understanding across all role players in the industry, from insureds to brokers to whatever the case is, as to the role and the purpose and the benefits or not of and the pitfalls of business interruption insurance.
Yes, Sid, please. Sorry, sis, just press over there so that the virtual people can hear and see you, and then maybe say your name. Sorry about that. Thank you.
My name is Baisi from MSP Consultants. Yeah. There was a question from one of the people that are online to say, how do we create awareness or excite a person who's in Mthatha, who is studying? Until INSETA, together with the insurance company and government, come together and introduce the insurance, I don't know whether as a subject, we do have things like geography, physics, math, but our children are not taught about insurance. We need to unlearn. You know, when I was growing up in the 60s, we only knew insurance as when you die, so that your family can inherit, etc., etc. Currently, insurance is not just when you die. It's for your health, for your assets, and a lot of things. So I think INSETA should take the responsibility to make sure that children from higher primary and the ones that ended grade 4, and then after that grade 5 and upwards, the subject of insurance needs to be brought in order for people to understand about how the insurance work, what type of insurance, etc., etc. A gentleman over there mentioned the issue of the people that were never exposed. They don't know, they're not covered. I think INSETA is something that needs to be discussed with the Minister of Basic Education together with Higher Education. It's now come to a stage where we need to start educating our children.
And you don't let them anywhere near one of my business interruption lectures.
Thank you very much for that input as well. So I wonder if there are very direct questions with regards to the business interruption policy and all the technicalities around that from members of the industry, of the insurance industry, and then in a way take the other broad INSETA questions a little bit later, just to give Donna some time to breathe as well. But because the INSETA questions are probably not as technical and as direct as the law seemed to be.
Only. But I'm around, so if things pop up, feel free to hijack Prof. Vivian's further lecture, and I'm happy to deal with those there. But I think in summary, then, just arising from what you've seen in terms of general litigation, to consider for researchers the effect and consequences for general principles of interpretation of insurance contracts, the effect on proximate cause. You can look at the effect on application of the Trends Clause, particularly its consequences for broader, wide area catastrophe claims, and then you can obviously have a look at specific wordings and phrases that have been used as well. But there are at least, I think, 3 very broad categories that are worthwhile looking at and have consequences not simply for business interruption insurance, but much wider in terms of policies in general. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Donald. Okay, so according to our program, we do have a provision to wrap up something such as lessons not learned and suggestions. So we can either quickly do that, because I know you're going to be short on that time, and then go back to the INSETA questions and then wrap up. Do you want to do them now, Adeline? Okay, Adeline is saying that she has to address the INSETA questions right now. Over to you, Adeline.
Thanks, Lebo. Just before anyone or I forget these answers. So in terms of the question asked by Professor Colin Thacker from DUT, when it comes to a small office, home office, we all know that over time and because of COVID, a lot of businesses and people have had to move to a home office. And there needs to be research done around this. Professor Thacker has mentioned this because it's something we would be looking at in the research chair with DUT. So anyone who is probably wanting to learn or understand more or be part of the research process and the program as we research the changes to moving from your outside office to your home office, because that is going to be the future for us. And before COVID hit, Prof. Thacker had mentioned this in a few seminars about 3 to 4 years ago, that we would probably be moving in the next 5 to 10 years. Needless to say, we had to move a bit sooner into our own office from home. So it's something we will be looking at, Prof. I hear you. In terms of rural support, I'm sorry, I didn't get the gentleman's name, but the rural support initiatives, INSETA currently runs rural learnerships. And we have our learning division that participates in that program. INSETA does have programs running in the rural areas. The only challenge we faced with is that we don't have many businesses in the rural areas. And there was a suggestion, and I'm not sure who it was, I think it was another session I attended where someone had said, if there is no businesses in one place, you got to move that person to the place where there is businesses. But we can't necessarily move all the people out of the rural area to go. And at the moment, you see how Gauteng has had an influx of people coming from rural areas to study and work here over time. If we had more businesses in the rural area, we could expand that at a much greater scale. We've currently run research we've tracked research over the last 5 years, tracking rural learnerships as one of the components. And we found that when we did it in smaller groups, we had a good success rate. The impact was quite high. Now, taking a model like that and increasing it at a rapid rate too quickly could give you negative results. So when it comes to rural research, please put your email down on the chat. We have the INSETA management team that is sitting on the chat as well, and they can take your email address and talk to you about this. And this falls hand in hand with the next question around what Baisi had mentioned around creating awareness and excitement. We have our marketing division and all the other divisions that are involved in creating the awareness of insurance as a career. We are also one of the sponsors of the Insurance Apprentice, promoting careers in insurance. And in terms of making insurance a subject, spot on, it's always been something we've been thinking about. But the policy discussions don't even start with us as a CETA. It does start with the Basic Education Ministry. And maybe this is something we all need to take forward. If nothing else, we take that forward to say that insurance needs to be put forward as a subject in the schooling environment. What would it look like? Who are the policy makers and the decision makers? And everyone comes together to look at how do we get there, because it is overdue. And there may be, I know that there is in the colleges, there is insurance being run as a subject for some of the colleges now, and higher education has been far ahead of the game. They've been running it well. And there can be train-the-trainer programs and whatever to facilitate this. But we need to start somewhere. So, Prof, I'm going to be knocking on your door again to have a look to see. And I'm sure that Baisi is going to want to tag along as well. She's quite passionate about training and development and creating awareness. So let's take these forward. INSETA has been making note of all the changes that are coming and things that we need to embark on. And maybe this becomes an area on our research agenda that we start to research and look into. It's a start. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Adeline, and I'm sure you will be receiving contact details of people that want to work in those spaces, the rural space and the education space. I don't, is this, Dr. Lawrence Happy? Okay. Okay, you can go ahead, sir.
No, thank you very much. I get worried when you say Lawrence again. Yeah, we are on a right footing, INSETA, and VERS. So we're talking about, enhancing the awareness. This is not only in the rural areas, but also in the township. And I see here also the broker fraternal, which is the linking point between, the insurance companies and INSETA playing a role here, because the different brokers of financial intermediaries are located within these communities where this awareness has got to be made. That would be a two-pronged solution. It would be making awareness to the prospective consumers of insurance and those that want to take insurance as a career, of choice. So having those days, of course, it will have to start from a discussion of, those days and the content of those days in these different localities, by the stakeholders, because by and large, these communities know about Santam, know about Old Mutual, because the companies go there to drive product selling, but INSETA, comes in to educate the community and also make the youngsters aware that this is a career of choice. So that can actually be enhanced by, bringing the different role players, vets in the space of packaging the academic part, and the brokers or financial intermediaries, bring in that link between the communities that we need to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lawrence. Sorry to say again, you're talking about very valid points for the industry. So if anybody else wants to add to that, when I'm looking at my time and we've got around 5 to 10 minutes. So if anybody wants to make a comment on any aspect of what was discussed today, I'm not going to say happy because it's fine. Let's discuss.
My question refers to the first presentation by Prof. Vivian. My expectation when I came here, I had expected to see the effect of COVID, yes, in South Africa and other countries. But what I've observed is we're focusing only on the insurance. I don't know how to put it. We haven't handled the impact of COVID on your health insurance / medical aid schemes. Or is it because it's a unique product that is in South Africa, other countries they call it health insurance or whatever, or the way it's structured in South Africa, it's not the way other countries are doing it. We would really want to know how COVID impacted those healthcare companies, the insurance companies. And also, what I didn't pick up is the impact on us, the runners, people who are making sure that these big corporates, they get those clients. Nothing has been said about that. I don't know if you are still going to come to that or what. And then the CEO mentioned the issue of making sure that you do the return on investment by tracking down the people that are trained in INSETA. I was really disappointed this year. I took 2 students who have been trained by one of the insurance company, and they have been in the system. Okay, there was COVID, there was an interruption. I had to start from scratch, educating them, trying to show them that why you were approved to study in this thing. I just felt that not much is done. These kids are just coming onto this for the sake of getting a stipend. And we also, as the brokers, I think we're not doing justice to these children. We're not training them to be better people tomorrow. We are training them to use them in order to push whatever that we want to push. And then from there, after the program has come to an end, we release those children and they're not employed. It's sad to see our tax money not being seen to the end. So I think INSETA, together with your old mutuals, your Sanlam, your medical aid schemes like your Bonitas, because they also do take these kids, inspections and follow-ups, they need to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ospaisi. Prof. Vivian, will you take the one about the COVID effect? I don't know how much research is at your hands with regards to how much that has affected it, and Adeline, you will take the one about probably work readiness, or because actually between both you and Prof. Vivian, you will be able to address both sections. Prof, if you can go close to any of the mics so that you are audible and seeable by our colleagues who are attending virtual, and just a reminder to our colleagues who are attending virtual to email Mike Stewart so that we can relay your question. Thank you.
I think the point you raise is very valid. I think when you're arranging to have a conference of any sort, you have to pick what you can fit into the time, or you have to extend it. So at this point of time, as far as insurance is concerned, the big issue which has happened around the world is the impact on the interruption insurance. There hasn't been the same discussion on medical aids and things like that. To deal with that, we would have to have a much longer conference, which I'm not going to do my last presentation, but if I did the last presentation, you can see that this could expand over 2 days. It doesn't have to be 1 day. And then you can pick up medical aid and all the other aspects. So it's not that we're not concerned about that. It's just it didn't fit in with what we could fit into this conference. And this was picked because of the litigation which has taken place all around the world. It's unprecedented. And the point that Donald's made is actually a very important point, is that these decisions which have been made are really changing the very fundamental way we look at insurance. So they're very, very important. And all of those things, I think, deserve to be researched in great detail. So it's really to highlight those things. And the other point that Donald made, which I think is quite important, is when he said that, if you can talk to the people in the insurance industry, there's not that much knowledge about these things. And so the Body of Knowledge project, which says that, you should do 8 courses over a period of 2 years. So at the end of that period, you're very, very technically competent. So if that project was up and running, then we would have a completely different thing. So it's not that your points are not valid, the points are very valid. We just couldn't fit it all into one, and you had to just pick what you could do in the time which was available. And that time was really to explain the research agenda, the research which has been done, and then to take one particular aspect which is of interest, which is COVID and insurance, and deal with that. If we continued this process, a year or so, we could have a one-day conference or a two-day conference where we could have different sessions looking at all of these things. Hopefully, each of those come out with something practical. So, very valid point.
Thanks, Prof. Baisi, on your first question about wanting to see some sort of research on the impact of COVID on healthcare companies, just to share and give you some insights, INSETA has about 2 years ago started our baseline research on the NHI and the introduction of NHI, and we had halted this over the past year, or actually year and a half, when the regulations for NHI were gazetted. There were some pilots that are currently underway now that are out in the public domain. The research coming out of NHI is not enough for us to take forward from a skills development perspective. What we have started doing again, I've recruited a public health graduate in research, who's Talio's here with me today, to assist with looking at the NHI post-COVID, because the discussions are starting again around the impact of COVID, and would we have been in a better state as a country if we had had NHI active already? So there's a lot happening. There are a few of our insurance companies that we've already had meetings with as INSETA. We've spoken to people from Discovery, Melanie here from Generic, and a few others that we have set up meetings with to understand the impact of COVID on the healthcare businesses. We were particularly concerned, and some of our questions were around what would happen to our medical aid brokers in that space, because the Gazette had stated that they would do away with those grouping of people. So what will this mean? Do we need new skill sets, or do we take that skill set currently in that space, upskill them to do something else? Do they become the administrators of the fund? So I just want to share with you that there's work being done, but we are mindful that the country does not even have money to proceed with the NHI. So it is still far from here, and they're expecting that in the next 5 years something will happen. Pilot studies are underway. If anyone wants to speak to me about the NHI, myself or Talia is here today, we can give you the information we have. But it's not enough for us to make a decision on what the impact will be on our insurance companies right now, the healthcare businesses, because they are operating business as usual. That's what they've told us. They're operating business as usual because there is no firm decisions being made by government as yet. And we'll take that offline and continue that discussion at another stage. When it comes to the impact of COVID on businesses in general, INSETA had run a survey in May last year, May of 2020. We then ran a survey again in September 2020 to monitor and measure the impact of pre and post-COVID. We will then run another survey in March now, going into April, to keep on doing that measurement. And we are planning to hold a seminar in August this year to bring all the research together. It's almost going to be like a flash session of research that's been done over the last year to 2 years, and because of the disruption of COVID, we weren't able to complete a lot of our research on time. And I know Wits as well, you were rushing to getting tracer studies and things done, and still reports are still coming in. And I thank you so much for your team to meet the deadline dates. But we are planning to hold the seminar. One thing we must realize is that research cannot be rushed. If you rush research, you're going to get results that are not correct, and you're going to be reflecting something that is not the norm and is not the reality. So we're asked to indulge us and wait for the results. And whilst we are collating research, we will be doing that over the next 4 months to collate research over the last 1.5 years between WITS, DUT, and UCT, who are our research partners, and then host our almost conference in August this year. So we bring all the research together, one of which is the impact of COVID on businesses. And just to give you a snippet on what's come through in terms of the research on COVID, in May last year, we had expected that actually businesses had indicated they expect about 70% retrenchments across the country. That's what came out. And that was a huge sample of companies, and I don't have the data with me now, but it was probably about 200 companies. And in September, again, we're asked the companies the same question on what would they see in terms of retrenchments across the board. And it had come down significantly to about 45%. And the reason for that was that the insurance sector is quite a resilient sector. When they saw COVID hitting, but already you must understand that our sector had already been on the road. They work from home. They have their laptops. They were equipped. A lot of the companies, I was speaking to Melanie from Generic, and I said to her, Melanie, how is your teams coping? And I phoned Discovery. I was phoning all the companies to find out how are your teams coping. And they had an action plan in place. Their business disruption protocols were set into motion at the same time. And the businesses were able to run. It is our small business then, Baisi, that you'd be concerned because they weren't as tech savvy as our large businesses and weren't able to adjust. So in terms of that, whilst the small businesses were equally as resilient, for them it was survival of the fittest. And they literally had to put staff on short time and cut out certain resources that they didn't need. And a lot of them had to move home. Small office, home office was the way to go for them. So a lot coming through in the research that says, despite the fact that COVID has hit, we have seen retrenchments across the board, not as significant as one would have thought initially. The insurance sector has embraced the whole pandemic and the disruption that they've been faced with. They've put plans in place. Small businesses have actually grouped together with other small businesses to share resources. And it's quite interesting when it comes to shared resources, how people have grouped together. The internet has become everyone's great friend. The digital, people have had to move towards digitalization overnight. And they've embraced that. Many have. So I'd love to sit with you and share more of that research over coffee, but I'm not going to take any more of your time, Lebo. Baisi, I hope I've answered your question. The last comment that you made, your comments are noted. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Adeline, and ending it on a high note. Prof. Vivian, what I can say is that you can summarize between, it's your summary and lunch is all I'm going to say. That's who is like standing between what and what. And then we'll welcome Prof. Do to close for us. But if you have your last summary in terms of lessons not learned. Yeah. Okay, but if that's the hurry to lunch. If there is any burning comments or questions, we can take one or two. And then, okay. If not, we're very honored today to actually have with us the head of School of Business Science, who actually, like the INSETA CEO, is pretty new in the school as well, and is a woman. And so we just really honored, and she will give us the vote of thanks. But Prof. Do, just to say that, to thank you for being with us today and for also being excited about this chair. So on behalf of the chair and the VETS team, thank you very much for being with us in this journey and actually even taking a day to attend this whole session. So over to you for the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks INSETA, and thanks Prof. Vivian and Albert, and even Mike, who is not here. Oh, he's here. Oh, okay, thanks so very much. Yeah, I'm taking the full day, because I started just 2 months as head of school of business sciences, and I had a meeting with one of my colleagues at UJ, and she's doing very well as director of her school. And I asked her, like, how are you doing it so very well? Your students are doing well. One of your departments is, like, their marketing department is the best in Africa. How are you doing it? How did you get those big funding? And she told me, make friends with the INSETA people. So when I saw that meeting, I slept today. I had to put my alarm, then I increased the volume. I'm like, Helen, you have to be there on time. So thanks so very much. And I will just give you a brief of the School of Business Sciences. It's a school that was cut off from another school, School of Economics and Business Sciences. So it's been split into 2 schools. The other one is School of Economic and Finance. They have Economics and Finance. Then the School of Business Sciences, we have Marketing, Information System. We have Management and Human Resources. Then we have Insurance and Risk. So when I became the head of school, I was looking at the portfolio of the staff, which division do have all the professors and the senior lecturers and all of the big boys, and I saw insurance had just, I don't think they have a senior lecturer. Then they have one Prof. Vivian, who is almost retiring. Then I thought, oh my gosh, this would be one problem child. And I remember one of my friends telling me about the mom who had 4 girls, and those 4 girls, 3 of them went, higher education, and one of them wasn't really equipped because she didn't really like school. And now she is praying for these girls to be married, and the person who comes chooses that one who is not well equipped. And the mom like, oh no, please don't do this. I know your parents, not this one. Please, they are all of these other girls. I don't want you to come back and tell me, oh. So the mom said, I will put the lobola you pay on the doors, the top of my door, and wait, and I give you 1 year. If you still continue with her, then I use the money. And why am I bringing this story? I thought insurance was like one of the problem children. And now the first time I get invited for one of my children who have met a good partner that is somewhat rich, definitely, because they said, make friends with. It's the insurance. I'm like, oh, okay. This is a brilliant partnership. So I'm so happy. It's a new school, and I look at the funding you've brought into the school, about 5 million. I'm like, oh my gosh, a new baby. And with 5 million, this exemplifies the 3 wise men who came to see Jesus as a little baby. And they brought frankincense and gold and myrrh. The gold to show that you're meeting a king, and that is why I'm becoming the head of school. So I make the school a king in this country and in Africa. So I am happy with your gold and frankincense, but I don't want the myrrh, because the myrrh was to put them, anoint Jesus when he's dead. No, I don't want that one. We are not dying. we'll just go on and on and on and make a big difference in the country as a school. You see the combination: marketing, information system, human resources, insurance. Brilliant combination. So we guys have come in to help us from 2019 to 2021 or so. So I was looking at the various areas that you're supporting, and for those who don't know, I will read it out to you guys. So you see these boys they call INSETA. They are really big boys. So yeah, I see you want to, you have establishment of the VITS INSETA chair in insurance, and you're looking for a research chair. That's so brilliant, and I'll tell you why that is so important. Appointment of an insurance research chair, talk about that. Development and delivery of a research agenda, and formulation of body of insurance knowledge, and establishment of an insurance library, resource center, support for undergraduate, and actually support for master's, PhD studies, undergraduate, promotion of skills and everything. And I read through this and I'm like, oh my gosh, Helen, just stop your negative perception about insurance. Looking at this, I grew up as a little girl thinking these insurance people who stress my dad so much. When he's paying the insurance, they give him those little tiny writing stuff. When they have to pay him, that was my perception. He fights with them. And I had the perception like insurance is something where if you drink and drive, you hit your car, then you call them. That was my picture. Then I'm looking at what you guys are doing. I'm like, oh my gosh. They are really doing a whole lot of things. And I'm happy that that person asked the question, how do you create awareness of what you're doing? Because that is the perception some of us do have. To the extent I came to VITS and I looked at all courses, I'm like, not insurance. No, I don't even want their scholarship. But now, is it about just creating awareness? How do you change people's perception about insurance? And that goes back to one of your objectives from this funding, the conference. When you bring in the conference and people do lots of presentations about what you do, people sit there, definitely you would invite lots of people. And now it changes the picture of what you guys are doing. Some will sit there in the conferences, they will be playing with their cell phones and you will think they are not listening. But it plays in their subconscious, or subconsciousness, if you may call it that way. And when that time comes, they would act. And I love the fact that Prof. Vivian was talking about the digitalization of the results they get from their research. That is so very important. And you don't only put it on that academic forum, put it in social media, connect it into other sources of where young people can pick up the information. Because the new world we are, everything you have to do, you pick up your phone and you Google. How do I do this? There is even, I was driving yesterday, they are talking about FinTalk, where young people want financial advice. Why not about insurance? Put all of the result, not just on all of these academic write-ups and books and everything. Put them when they talk about insurance, these young people will go click and it links them to everything or all of your offerings. My son, my gate got bad the other day. I hit my gate and it was bad. I'm like, oh gosh, what do I do? I'm like, hey, you're a young man. You empty my milk and my bread. Look for a solution for this gate. I am not calling any person in this yard. Find a solution for this gate. And he took his phone and he's like, Mom, I will see what I can do. So he had to find up solutions. So all of what we do, we put it in the media space and social media and everything, and the young people would know. about what we are doing. So talking about a research chair is a very important one. We have talked about, she asked the question about, is insurance just about what we are known to do? How do we impact ordinary people's life, companies, and bring in other stakeholders? And with a research chair, you conduct research not just for the sake of the insurance people. With the research chair, they can collaborate with other divisions and create information that can be beneficial to all the stakeholders, including the consumers and the companies. And talking about that, one of my visions is to create a research excellence center. And that research excellence center is to look at how all of the divisional disciplines are combined to conduct research. And we've started with one where I will be working with Dr. Albert, and I'm working with marketing people, working with management and human resources. We want to look at how you can use crowdsourced data or research and development to predict the natural disasters before they even come in. And when we predict them, how are we prepared? How are companies? Actually, it looks at how the vulnerability of consumers, vulnerability of companies, and their preparedness to handle the risks that would come, would work with them. So that is part of what we would do. So your funding, I don't know whether you would ask me to go scratch in the what, or you would just call me aside to say, Helen, don't fight with them. I have something for you. So it's so very important. I know I'm taking lots of your time, but I'm really excited about what you guys are doing. Then the support of postgraduate studies is so very important. And I like the fact that Prof. Vivian said, it's not just about developing research, it's training and getting additional skills so that those skills can be transferred to other people and other students. And if you see, when you start a big project, you will always see people having a prototype. Even for building, they put that flat thing where you see, where do I want to get to as I start this project? And I sit here and I will tell you, I am like one of the products of someone who was funded and making the impact. I did my honors and master's year at WITS, and I remember I was self-sponsored and I got really tight up financially. I could not pay my rent. Then I walked to the VC's office, 11th floor, and they stopped me like, you're not going to see the VC. I'm like, no. If you see me take this courage to come to the 11th floor, know that it's really bad. And like, okay, go see him. Then I met Prof. Loizo, like, what? How did you get here? I'm like, Prof, just listen. And he told me, to the extent you had the courage to climb to this 11th floor, know that your problem is solved. But your job is just to convince me of the money you need. And he gave me 40,000. And I sit here, I'm not just the head of school. In 5 years at WITS, I produced 8 PhDs, 2 staff at UJ, 1 at Val University of Technology, 1 in Mozambique, 1 in Ghana, 1 in Nigeria, and all of them are staff. So the little thing you plant in somebody, you'll be surprised how much it goes that far. So with a postgraduate, you would never know. You will make that impact. So the way forward, please continue to support them. I know you're paying for the chair and the insurance division. We need, I was speaking to Dr. Albert, like, can you get visiting professors to support you? Because they don't have lots of staff, and they tend to supervise lots of students and lots of teaching work, and they don't have enough time for that brilliant research. So if they have funding where they can bring visiting professors that can help them supervise the master's and PhD students, and they focus on research and get the promotions and do the great things, that would be brilliant. So I've taken so much of your time, but I want to remember Oprah's interview with Tata Mandela. And before she interviewed Tata Mandela, she had to ask about him, like, what do I do? How do I go about it? And one of the answers they gave her was like, he would ask you to drop something like biscuits for his children. And his children, the nation. So I know you are giving money to the insurance industry. Please, you are our visitors. We are supposed to give you a whole lot. But when you go, drop something for my children, for the entire school. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Du, for that passionate speech that you shared. And I don't think I even have to do anything anymore. I'm in the development and fundraising office with Mike. I think you take care so much of your children that you're a great mom. Thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our seminar today. A word of thank you very much once again, Adeline, to INSETA. We can't thank you enough for this partnership, and to everybody in the room, you being the industry, and you feeding INSETA and the work that they do. I think the partnership between the three kind of industries has really been a great journey for us, and we hope to continue that way. In terms of, so I've said closure, so Vele, lunch is outside. It is pre-packed and pre-packaged, but it is also an opportunity for people to share contacts and views and whatever. But after lunch, everybody is free to go home. So thank you so very much. Have a safe trip. Don't forget to sanitize. They do work. They're just automatic. I'm not just bragging. It's because but thank you very much.